Chapter 474. The source of the Holy War was the goddesses of chaos and chaos. Perhaps their initial hope was that all living creatures would become stronger and not be destroyed by invaders from the outside world. But the end result was thousands of years of accumulation built a glorious civilization. But it's like a sandcastle built by a child on a beach. When the next wave of the sea comes, all that's left is ruins. Were all the blooming flowers just a dream? Are all the sacrifices and hard work for nothing? The pursuit of fame and fortune was usually harmless, but lofty ideals could destroy the world. Life was like a drama, and the world was unpredictable. Sometimes, the truth was far more painful than a lie. Under the watchful eyes of the Most High One, all life was like a circus, constantly playing out the farce of life and death. In the end, no matter how far civilization had developed, what awaited them was only intermittent harvests. Just when would this despairing fate end? Hatred? Resentment? Was he dissatisfied? Of course. Even if the lives of mortals are given by them, even if the world under our feet is given by them, can parents take the lives of their children at will? Can they turn the hardships of mortals into a joke? Everyone else respected the two goddesses of chaos and chaos, and even praised them as divine detectives. However, I only felt hatred towards them. After all, I had received so many years of atheistic education, and my rational thinking made it impossible for me to believe in any particular god. In my eyes, rather than saying that the two goddesses of chaos and chaos were respectable goddesses of creation, it would be more accurate to say that they were two selfish bastards. If there's a chance, I must kill them and put an end to all of this. This was not the first time he had thought of this, and he had even tried it out. They are invincible in Aichi because they're the true masters of Aichi and will receive the support of the entire world. However, in a brand new world, they are just a more difficult opponent to deal with. They can be defeated or even killed. If Cynthia hadn't done something to him, then this was the only way. All his thoughts returned to the only possibility. During the battle against Omdaroken, I created Frigid Winter Earth in order to cut off all support for Omdaroken and use the power of another world to kill him. This was actually just a rehearsal, just to verify my thoughts and theories. The results made me happy, but also a little dejected. Creating a brand new world and killing the goddess of creation in it is possible, but to actually do it isn't practical. Just because the theory was correct didn't mean that it was half the battle. There were many problems exposed during the rehearsal, but two of them were fatal. First of all, my Frigid Winter Earth hadn't been able to completely cut off Immortal Lorcan's connection with the Earth Elemental Throne. In the end, I had to destroy the Earth Elemental Throne in order to obtain victory. This means that my current Frigid Winter Earth is mostly useless against existences on the level of the Creator. Not only do I have to level up the entire world and increase its independence and isolation abilities, but I also have to completely defeat the goddess. But the goddess of Earth, Frigid Winter Creation, Creator, and Aichi God, Goddess, and Earth. With the establishment of Hell, this part of the difficulty had already been overcome. However, the other part of the difficulty made this backup plan only a backup plan that had no meaning at all. That was Goddess and of Saints. The goddess and of goddess god, even Omdaroken, who was cut off from the Frigid Winter Earth, forced me to use all my trump cards in order to barely win. Even if I took away their undefeatable powers, they would still be pure individuals with far more power than any main god. They would still be basically undefeatable existences. Even if I can temporarily cut off their connection to the Aichi god plane, what if I can't defeat them? Not only did the game's history have astonishing battle records of the goddess and goddess of creation killing main gods after awakening, Ale also proved that this path was impossible. And so, I could only continue with my backup plan. When Cavendish told me his goal, my first reaction wasn't to ask should I kill them, but rather, that's impossible. Yet Cavendish actually said that there was a chance to kill them. While I was astonished, many pieces of information flashed through my mind, and I finally realized what I had overlooked. Previously, the goddess and goddess of Order's combat strength was calculated based on how powerful they would be after they awakened. After all, This was the only time they appeared in the game's history. But now, they're nothing more than remnant souls residing in our bodies. They've lost the protection of their physical bodies, so it's only natural that it's possible to kill them. New information brought new opportunities. If it wasn't for the fact that I had so many things on hand, I would have thought of this when my system was revealed to be the remnant souls of the Goddess of Order. How do I kill them? Even in this dimension, their souls are still indestructible. But they're still souls, and this dimension is specifically targeted at souls. The Tower of Death is the Tower of Souls of the Creator Goddesses. It can separate the two bastards from our bodies, and the Tower of Eyes can bestow physical bodies upon the dead. In that case, if we give them their weakest physical bodies and drag them into the void, we'll naturally be able to completely end them. The Creator Goddesses were creator-level existences, but the four pillars were also creator-level existences. This was basically a different type of resurrection magic that would revive the two goddesses' remnant souls in a different method. It was only natural that they would be killed since they were now mortals. Stop arguing. Today shall be the day of your death. Cavendish's sudden angry shout surprised me. However, his bloodshot eyes and anger told me that he was talking about the person who had possessed his own soul. My system remained silent, but I could sense a rare fear. At this moment, I more or less understood Cavendish's plan. He had learned about the use of the four pillars of Hades from his spy. Since he had more information than I did, he was the first to think of this possibility. Unlike the Goddess of Order, who could only disguise herself as my system, Cynthia was still in control of the Chaos Abyss, so she should still have the ability to move freely. In that case, he must have used some method to trick Cynthia into coming to his body and bringing her to the guillotine. That was why he said that he had brought a prisoner on death row. After he learned about my plan, not only did he not ruin it, he even secretly helped my plan. In the end, he even helped my grand plan to obtain additional results. From a certain standpoint, this was actually a different type of cooperation. And now, he was bringing Cynthia to the Tower of Ice. His so-called surrender had been nothing more than a joke. This had been his plan from the very start. I had always wanted to defeat or even kill the two creator goddesses of order and chaos. But now that this opportunity was truly in my hands, I was hesitating. You don't intend to say anything? My system remained silent, as if she had already placed her fate in my hands. What will happen if you really die? Will the world of He be affected? This time, I had an answer. Relax. Even if my divine soul is destroyed, it won't directly affect the world. I've already been rejected by the source of order. I'm nothing more than a lonely soul. However, Cynthia is different. She's still the Chaos Abyss's master. If you kill her, that means that all the Chaos Abyss and demons will go out of control. There will be no limit to this holy war. The pure Chaos Abyss will make the demons far stronger than you can imagine. Their desire for souls will be endless. Enough. I only want to know how you're doing. Astria's angry rebuke interrupted Cynthia's explanation. However, she continued to explain her own thoughts. Perhaps killing Cynthia will end everything, but the Chaos Abyss will go out of control. You've already accomplished this. True peace is just around the corner. As long as you watch Cynthia fall into a deep sleep due to a lack of nourishment, the holy war will end. There's no need to take any risks. You know that without Cynthia's control, the demons will never stop their slaughter. The holy war will never end. I know that my sister and I have committed crimes. That's why you can kill me. This is the original sin that I deserve. But you need to think about the consequences of killing Cynthia. We've already seen the dawn. Don't miss this final chance. I never expected that you would be so naive. Do you think that Cynthia will have a future if you let her be? Indeed, the River Styx has cut off Cynthia's supplies. However, she has an even more direct method of replenishing herself. She can use her demon army to forcefully harvest souls and use blood sacrifices to make up for her needs. Even if she needs to sacrifice all the living in the mortal plane in order to revive herself, she will still do so. This holy war has never had a path of retreat from the very start. This wasn't something I said without thinking. This was the result of my discussion with Ale. We never believed that just the establishment of the Hades would be enough to end everything. Out of the three factions of the Chaos Abyss, the Hades of Hades and the Divine Kingdom of Order, we were still the weakest. Our original expectations were because we had underestimated the moral limits of the goddesses. Only absorbing the naturally split soul shards in the cycle of reincarnation to obtain nourishment will definitely not be as good as completely devouring souls. Once the goddesses lose the relatively gentle possibility of awakening, they definitely won't allow themselves to fall into eternal slumber. The worst result will be that both factions will kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. They'll do anything to harvest the souls of mortals in order to feed their own mothers. That will be a massacre of the entire mortal plane. As the weaker third faction, going against both factions at the same time will be the equivalent of suicide. We need to take advantage of the conflict between both sides. That's why we can only cut off the possibility of one side awakening. That's the only way to end the Holy War, rather than having the Holy War completely become a battle to the death. Obviously, the Order faction was easier to accept than the Chaos faction. At the very least, Ale believed that Astria would be easier to deal with than Cynthia. That was why we preserved the Heaven's Pillar, but cut off the River Styx. That was why we preserved enough mortal strength and mortal heroes in order to deal with the Chaos Abyss's possible retaliation. The Dark Elf Knight, Absolute Gentleman Alliance, Northland's Mist Alliance, underground factions, powerful human countries, and so on. Even if we successfully established the Hades, the mortals' future would still be opened up by mortals. The final Holy War would naturally be ended by mortals themselves. And now, there were so many difficult problems before me. How should I deal with Astria? Wouldn't killing Cynthia be equivalent to releasing all the demons in the Chaos Abyss? Wouldn't keeping Cynthia alive be equivalent to letting her control all the demon lords and harvest all the lives in the mortal plane? As for Cavendish, perhaps it was only my intuition, or perhaps it was a strange connection between my two souls, but I suddenly felt that Cavendish was far more dangerous than Cynthia. He was more like the Chaos Abyss. If Cynthia dies, will you be able to restrict all the demon lords and control the war? Don't be so naive. Chaos has never needed an eternal leader. Every demon wishes to climb higher. This is an instinct engraved in their bloodline. Restrict? How is that possible? Besides, why would I do such a boring thing? Cavendish didn't hide his own expectations, nor was he able to hide them. His answer also confirmed my judgment of Cavendish. He desired war, desired to obtain freedom in the Chaos Abyss, and desired to kill Cynthia, who was suppressing the Chaos Abyss. He believed that this would make her happy. He had no confidence in reaching the top of the Chaos Abyss, nor did he have any plans to obtain power. That seemingly divine plan was likely nothing more than a spontaneous idea. Damned creature of instincts. He managed to seize this opportunity with just his intuition alone. He simply wished for the cheating administrator to leave so that this war that was sweeping the entire world would become more interesting. As for the result, would he become the new Chaos Abyss Master because of this? He didn't care at all if the entire mortal plane would be destroyed because of this. He only wished that he could have fun. Before I could make a decision, the entire mortal plane suddenly began to shake. Judging from the rampaging energy storms, it seemed that the war in the Seven Hells had suddenly escalated. I even received an urgent report from Sophocles the Deceiver that he had suddenly broken his peace contract. Breaking a soul contract signed with a demon's true name would require a tremendous price. Hurry up and make your decision. We don't have much time. Look, some people have already been moved by Cynthia's request for reinforcements. Cynthia, just what did you promise to make those old fellows get serious? Doesn't this mean that I have a chance to fight against them? I've waited for so many years. How interesting. Chapter 475. How should I decide? Everyone was looking at me, as if my decision would decide the fate of the entire world. Yep, this was the truth. My current decision could indeed affect Eichi's fate. Apart from a math exam, It would be quite difficult to make a completely correct decision in this world. While I would obtain some benefits, I would also lose something of equal value. I had to choose at this moment. Everyone's eyes were on me. Ambiguity was the only option that couldn't be chosen, and I'd already made my decision. Cavendish had an expression of excitement as he looked at me, as if he had already noticed something. This is the Hades, so let's do things according to the rules of the Hades. Both goddesses are obviously unforgivable, but there's a difference. I did my best to organize my words so that my favoritism wouldn't be too obvious. In this world, intentionally killing someone is obviously a capital crime, but causing someone else's death through negligence will only result in a sentence of 7 or 8 years at most. The results are the same for both sides, but whether or not they have any malice is the core mechanism for determining who is guilty. Cynthia can't escape death. As for Astria, let's imprison her for life. I'll be responsible for imprisoning her until the end of the world. Cavendish didn't hide his disappointment at all. This wasn't the answer he desired at all. You trust that woman that much? Yep. I trust her more than I trust you. That's right. The law's judgment was only a reference. What truly made the decision was still my own subjective opinion. I trusted Astria, which was why I hoped that she would be able to survive. As for whether or not she would cause any trouble in the future, back when I took the wrong path, Adam and Marguerite imprisoned me for more than 100 years. Now, in order to prevent Astria from doing anything unpleasant, I would simply imprison her. Since the soul tower can be used to separate souls, it can naturally be strengthened as well. I can guarantee with my own soul that she won't ever regain her freedom. Cynthia's death might cause the holy war to go out of control. Even if she was still alive, the holy war would still go out of control. In order to end this holy war and destroy the fate of the world between the two goddesses, one of the creator goddesses would have to die. Since I had decided to let Astria live, it was only natural that I would have to kill Cynthia. Ale had previously come up with a strategy that would be biased towards order while remaining neutral. As for what was a mother, I pretended that I didn't hear anything at all. My parents in my previous life were on Earth, while my parents in this life had already died more than 300 years ago. If I really had to calculate it, a more general definition would be that all life in the world originated from the creator goddesses. Weren't we all their children? She didn't seem to have any maternal love. We were simply created by her. Yet, endless misfortune was arranged for us. And when I thought about how the Mist Kingdom and my birth parents would be destroyed because of her, I lost even the last bit of affection I had for her. On the other hand, Cavendish's face was filled with displeasure. He did not conceal his dissatisfaction at all. This was not the answer he was hoping for. Astria is trustworthy? Have you forgotten what happened to the god of holy light? From a certain point of view, Roland could be considered our common elder brother, but he was deceived by that woman and became a tool to abandon himself. Do you want to end up the same way? Hearing this, I smiled. At least in certain aspects, I was completely different from Cavendish. You think you can relax by pushing your guilt and regret onto others? I don't have such a habit. Perhaps Astria gave me advice or even subconsciously tried to guide me. But for me to reach where I am today, every step I took was my own choice. Perhaps I'll feel pain and regret for my past calamities, but I'm not foolish enough to deny my own past, nor will I be weak enough to push my guilt onto others. I paused for a moment as my past memories appeared in front of me. Although most of them were painful, there was nothing worth regretting. Even if everything happened again, it probably wouldn't be any different. My life is the path that I chose for myself. I have eyes, a brain, hands, and feet. I can see and think. Even if others give me advice and guidance, in the end, it's still my own heart that makes the decision. I don't know what happened to Roland back then, nor do I want to know. At the very least, I feel that Astria is trustworthy and she didn't harm me. That's enough for me. Yes, no matter how many times I said it, everything could be an excuse. It was simply because I trusted Astria. Astria, my system, had been by my side for more than 300 years, and she had always guided me. When I was a holy knight, she was the radiant holy knight training system. When I fell into darkness, she gave me evil points. When I tried to change my fate, I ended up becoming fate points. Astria wasn't the one guiding my fate. Rather, I was the one changing her. I could guess that perhaps Astria intentionally pretended to be a mindless system in hopes that she wouldn't affect my judgment too much. She probably only guided me in my pursuit of power. Without her help, it would have been impossible for me to create the Hades. I could guess what happened back then. From a certain standpoint, I had to thank Cavendish's existence. The Chaos bloodline would be attracted to the Chaos Abyss, and the Chaos Abyss's whispers would never stop. As a child of the Chaos Abyss, Roland would probably have to listen to the whispers of demons for several hours every day and night. It wouldn't be strange for him to make such a decision in the end, because he couldn't bear it any longer. Countless Chaos bloodlines, including Eliza and Cavendish, had all entered the Chaos Abyss in the end. I didn't hear any whispers from the Chaos Abyss. No matter how I looked at it, Cavendish was the one who helped me. He took over most of my Chaos bloodline, which also attracted Cynthia's attention. If my system had let Cynthia do whatever she wanted, and such a speechless Gemini split didn't happen, she would have been the Chaos Abyss Prince Roland from the game's history. Thank you. After a long period of silence, Astria finally thanked me. I knew that she wasn't thanking me for not killing her. She was thanking me for trusting her. No need to thank me. Verbal thanks aren't sincere at all. Remember to repay me with your body. Right? If that's the case, what's with the daily quests? Myth-ranked quests can be understood as major changes in fate that will bring about a large amount of the power of fate, but daily quests are both annoying and trivial. You won't be able to obtain anything from daily quests, will you? Your very existence is to break fate. That power will only increase as time passes. As for those daily quests, don't you think they're quite interesting and creative? They're quite suitable for killing time. I immediately got angry and wanted to take back what little trust one had left. Astria had actually made me suffer for several hundred years just for fun. It wasn't just to make you suffer, although it's indeed quite interesting to see you suffer. Cough. I should at least find a reason to give you points. If I told you that you could increase your income by doing nothing at all, wouldn't you become as lazy as a pig and stay at home all day? If you stay at home for too long, your heart will become very, very dark. Just look at your younger brother. Isn't he an obvious example? Seeing how anxious Cavendish was becoming, I thought back to the Liches that had gone crazy because they stayed at home for too long. I suddenly felt that Astria's words made sense, and I couldn't counter them at all. Could it be that Astria had truly become a pervert because he stayed at home for too long and had too little contact with others? Shut up. It was unknown who Cavendish was angrily shouting at. He paced back and forth while constantly pinching his head. It was obvious that something was wrong. Since everything was out in the open and Cynthia's Armageddon was about to arrive, my mind was still calm, but Astria's mind was probably in chaos. Cavendish covered his right eye as he lowered his head and panted heavily. It was obvious that he wasn't in a good condition. Looking through the gaps between his fingers, I could see that his right eye was completely bloodshot, and his pupil, which had become vertical, was filled with killing intent and anger. He was growling in his throat as if he was suppressing something. Ha, Trust. You'll regret it. Ha, I won't. Have you ever seen me regret anything? If someone really did lie to me, I'll admit that I was stupid and greedy, and then I'll just think of a way to take revenge. Regretting something won't change anything. It'll only make me feel bad. I didn't care at all about Cavendish's murderous expression at all. I shrugged, feeling even more relaxed now. I didn't pretend to be calm at all. I was even more relaxed inside than I appeared on the surface. Cavendish's bottom line for this negotiation was quite clear. Kill Cynthia and give the Chaos Abyss its freedom. Since I had already agreed to this condition, it meant that we had already reached an agreement. As for everything else, it didn't matter if we talked about it or not. Let's just treat it as a form of brotherhood. Perhaps this would be our last chance to talk face to face. My head is about to explode. This crazy bitch is insane. When will she start? Hurry up and kill her so I can finally have a good night's sleep. I shrugged helplessly. I wanted to hurry up as well, but didn't you want to use the Tower of Death to split your soul? That's quite difficult, and I can't do it. Let's wait until Ale sleeps enough first. The 4 pillars each had their own duties. It would be enough for them to operate normally. Splitting a creator god's soul wasn't something that could be done on its own. What if AL didn't wake up? Then I would just have to wait. But I felt that with AL's foundational abilities, he would probably be the first pillar god to truly awaken. Actually, you could take some action first. For example, go kill that Sophocles the Deceiver or something. I find him quite annoying. Once the Chaos Abyss regains its freedom, you'll have one less competitor. A free fighter sent to my doorstep was truly delightful. I had thought that Cavendish would agree to my request. That was because he had an impatient personality, and it was obvious that he needed an opponent to vent on. Plus, he wouldn't just watch as a Chaos main god came to save Cynthia. With his personality, he should have taken the initiative to attack. But when he heard what I said, he actually calmed down. Contrary to my expectations, Cavendish wasn't in a hurry at all. Instead, he slowly walked to the side and suddenly reached out with his hand. That pot of fish soup appeared once again. Then he took out several stools and stood on them while stirring the fish soup with a blender. I'm not in a hurry. Let's just wait. It's almost done. Let's eat some fresh fish soup first. After today, we probably won't have a chance to sit down and eat together again. That fishtail over there. How about some fresh and juicy fish meat? It's about the same age as you. Chapter 476. Even if the chess game between the two sides was confusing, it was often possible to distinguish the situation. At the very least, it was clear who had the upper hand and who was inferior at a glance. However, if it became a three-nation or four-nation military chess, even the chess pieces on the next side were unknown, and the situation naturally became confusing. Originally, we had been making a living in between the Chaos faction and the Order faction, so it could be said that we were victorious amidst the chaos. This had become a three-way setup. So many people's roles were naturally confused. There were quite a few double or triple spies, such as the Queen of Temptations or myself. I had multiple identities behind my back, and Carwins had also interfered. This was basically a four-way military chess game, with multiple parties involved. It was truly chaotic. The situation was chaotic. Everyone had their own thoughts, plans. But it wasn't difficult for me to tell the difference between friend and foe. After all, everyone in the world was motivated by personal benefits. Seeing what benefits everyone desired and whether or not they wanted the Hades to be successfully established would allow me to tell the difference between friend and foe. Now that the chess game was reaching its end, it was only natural that I would be able to see things even more clearly. The Order faction, which was weaker to begin with, was no longer under any pressure. The god of holy light Roland's incarnation had been killed by 3 consecutive god-ranked forbidden spells. Although incarnations were consumable items to begin with, it was impossible to recover this divine power, so successfully weakening the main body was a good thing. And the god of wisdom hadn't come here to make life difficult for us in the first place. Everything would be fine as long as we reached an agreement. Perhaps we would even gain another ally in the future. From a certain standpoint, this was another drawback of being too much of an Order faction. Without emotions or sufficient benefits to motivate them, the relatively independent Order main gods naturally wouldn't fight to the death for the emotionless source of order. From the very start, our main opponents had been the Chaos faction under Cynthia's command. We had used almost all of our aces on them. The Chaos faction still had 3 main gods on the battlefield. 2 of them were eternally hungry beasts that were still tearing at each other. So let's ignore them for now. Chaos War god Danavis was being heavily taken care of. One was the Demon Lord, and the other had already angered the leader of the 7 original sins. Danavis wouldn't be easy to deal with. I had to even prepare a backup for him, so it shouldn't be a problem. As for Deceiver the Deceiver, Envy Marcelet, and Pride Omar, who had broken the truce, had already completed their revivals. I directly ordered them to go support Cher, but I didn't order them to fight to the death. If a main god-level existence was forced into a corner, they would definitely have a large number of trump cards up their sleeves. Since the Hades' strategic goal was only to stall for time, it would be better to maintain this balance of power on the battlefield. There was no need to force them into a life-and-death struggle. Cavendish was very bored sitting there. He could already carve a stone chessboard, but he had no intention of going to the battlefield to fight against the demon lord. Do you think I'm a fool? You want me to be your free fighter until I complete my goal? I'll wait here. As for the fish soup, it had already been thrown to the side, not even willing to look at it. Just a single mouthful was enough to make the Abyss Prince's face turn green, and he immediately ran to the side and retched for a long time. This was far more powerful than any poison. After all, a main god-level demon should be naturally immune to all poisons. I originally didn't intend on eating it, but seeing Cavendish's reaction, I got curious and also tried a mouthful. I then immediately switched to another incarnation and tried to forget what I had just seen. The larger a fish was, the harder and older its flesh would be. As a demon lord, this fish's flesh would be able to ignore normal myth-ranked weapons. It wouldn't soften just by cooking it. Cavendish tossed in a large amount of strange items in order to make the fish palatable, such as powerful corrosive and sharpening potions, alchemy potions that would give weapons an armor-piercing effect, and magic flames that would corrode the ground of the Chaos Abyss. It seemed that the fish meat had indeed softened due to his random stirring. However, the color, taste, and super corrosive. I decided to switch to another incarnation. That would be much more direct than creating a new head and face. I tossed aside the super corrosive fish soup. In fact, I felt disgusted just looking at it. I actually wanted to ask Cavendish for some information on my enemies, to chat with him. What other trump cards do they have? Are there any that are easy to deal with? As long as you're willing to pay the price, anything is possible. However, I don't think it's a good idea to force them to fight to the death right now. Right, if I'm not mistaken, after the Hades are completed, all existences in this dimension are unable to leave? He was actually asking for information on us. Yep, the Hades are unable to leave. If the souls of the dead want to leave, they can only enter the cycle of reincarnation. This is the ironclad law of the Hades. All existences must obey it. Since I couldn't keep this a secret, of course I could tell him. Of course, if I misheard or misunderstood, it wouldn't be my fault. What's wrong with you? I, Womian's Roland, am one of the 4 pillar gods of the Hades. I've been tightly bound by the laws of the Hades. The 4 pillar gods will never be able to leave. This is the foundation of the Hades. I can guarantee it with my soul. The 4 pillar gods? You're just as always a liar who only tells the truth. Don't you know that whenever you're serious, you're probably lying? And as long as you swear, you're definitely lying. Was that so? Did I actually have such a habit? Thinking back, I was rendered speechless. That seemed to be the truth. That's wonderful. It would seem that we'll have another chance to fight again. Right? Since you're so free, why don't you spar with me? Did I sound like I had a lot of free time? Yep, I did have a lot of free time, but I wouldn't foolishly spar with Cavendish. Would I be so foolish as to spar with a holy knight who was a professional sword saint? So you're now a holy knight instead of sword saint? That's so convenient to remember. Now that the Hades were doing so well, and I was in a good mood, I might as well pretend that I didn't hear anything. The Hades were operating more and more smoothly now. The only enemies left were the Chaos main gods. Cavendish had made up for the weakness of the Earth elemental pillars, which was originally lacking in mobile combat strength. Yep, Cavendish had made up for this weakness. No matter how open-minded he was, since he was using the Tower of Ice and Tower of Death, he would naturally be guarding these 2 towers before the 4 pillar gods awakened. In that case, he would naturally become my fighter. What about after the 4 pillar gods awakened? As long as Ale could successfully awaken, there would be nothing for me to worry about. So what if Ale turned on me? The current situation seemed quite good. If it wasn't for the fact that the current situation wasn't suitable for me, I would have even started singing a little song. Suddenly, I felt that it was rare for the situation to be so good. It seemed that I could go crazy for a bit. The war is about to end. My long-cherished wish of so many years is about to be realized. I'm now invincible. Ha ha ha. After this war ends, I'll be able to return home and get married. Cough, cough. Don't look at me so strangely. I was just joking. Isn't it funny? I had carefully prepared 3 lines for this catchphrase, but not a single person laughed. This was quite embarrassing. I suddenly feel like there's a dangerous, evil intent in your tone. This is a new curse method. I'm getting goosebumps. It seems that it's quite effective. Even though I was clearly joking, Harloise questioned me with such a serious expression. This was quite difficult to accept. Were Harloise truly foolish otherworlders? Return home and get married? Marry who? Even Eliza, who was focused on her personal evolution, sent me a message of dissatisfaction. Still, this reminded me that I needed to send her to the land of spring as soon as possible. If I waited any longer, it would be too late. All right, at least I still have my system. Astria. This joke isn't cold at all. I seem to have found yet another reason to keep Astria around. For the sake of having a happy life in the future, how could I not have a servant who ridicule me by my side? Yep, your sense of humor is just as incorrigible as ever. You're also just as jinxed as ever. Take a look at Dang's battle situation. The situation has reversed yet again. I intend to give you the title of Those Who Seek Death Will Die. This will increase the chances of you successfully jinxing yourself. Do you like it? What? I turn my attention to Dang's battle situation in hell. However, I saw an inconceivable scene. Two gigantic beasts that should have been tearing each other apart had vanished without a trace. Only a gigantic demon egg was currently hatching. When I checked my clone's memories, I discovered an inconceivable scene. Just 1 minute ago, Carl, the turbid nightmare, the low-intelligence creature whose name was the sound of his own stomach moving, suddenly used a series of incredibly difficult binding magic arrays to bind Dang. And then, that gigantic piece of meat suddenly opened up, revealing an abnormally beautiful female, face hidden within. She actually swallowed Dang in one gulp, and then transformed into a demon egg filled with the power of the Chaos Abyss. This demon egg was gigantic. Although it was an egg, it wasn't completely round. It was as if countless pieces of meat were piled up together. The most eye-catching part was that the crevices on its surface kept flashing with a strange green light, which seemed to be some kind of magic rune. Some magic runes even twisted into faces that were wailing in pain, making anyone who saw them feel quite uncomfortable. According to my information, this demon relied on devouring to survive. The only meaning of its existence was to constantly eat and evolve. Its existence was completely in accordance with the will of the Chaos Abyss. However, due to its stupidity, it didn't have a noble title. In fact, it was even viewed as a type of calamity of the Chaos Abyss. The will of the Chaos Abyss. It was quite astonishing that Cynthia was able to control it to attack the Hades. I could understand that it was hiding its true power, but its constantly increasing energy level gave me a strong sense of threat. It also had a familiar, instinctive sense of fear. I seem to have experienced something like this before. Even if I didn't have an instinctive sense of danger, just based on its abnormal appearance, I knew that I couldn't just ignore it. What's going on with Carl? Why did he suddenly transform into an egg? I asked in a heavy tone. However, Cavendish suddenly chuckled. Carl, you've asked the right person. Only Cynthia and I know about this. The name Carl is nothing more than a joke. That's a piece of meat that's formed from countless Chaos Abyss remains and Chaos Abyss souls. It doesn't even have a sense of self. So how could it have a name? It doesn't have a sense of self? Then why did it come here? Cynthia is able to control a piece of meat that has no will of its own. Doesn't that mean it's using its own physical body? I can't be that unlucky. Cavendish had an expression of astonishment, as if he was saying that I actually guessed correctly. That's right. Cynthia's main body can't move, so she naturally thought of a way to create a backup physical body. However, don't worry too much. That's just a failed attempt. By the time it matures enough to carry Cynthia's divine soul, it'll probably have to eat and drink to its heart's content in several dozen holy wars. Cynthia has already given up on it. Now, even if it's forcefully activated, it won't be able to use its full combat strength without a divine soul. It won't be able to last for long. Cavendish, you're scamming me again. At this moment, I understood. Since Cynthia was facing the end of the world, she would naturally do everything she could to fight to the death. Activating this physical body to save her divine soul was a must. Since Cavendish knew about this yet didn't say it out loud, and was instead leisurely cooking soup here, it was obvious that he intended to wait for that piece of dead meat to revive and drag us into his trap. I had just been happily having Cavendish act as my fighter, but I unexpectedly fell into his trap instead. Of course I was displeased, and my mood instantly became terrible. Same to you. Same to you. Huh. I'm actually quite happy that I'm able to fight alongside you one last time before I kill you. Meanwhile, Cavendish was smiling quite happily, as if he was proud of successfully tricking me. However, I felt like he was even happier that he would soon have an opponent to vent on. However, I didn't intend to waste any more time with him. The dimensional teleportation door had already opened, so I suddenly walked up and kicked him in. Womian's Roland's main body had already regenerated to the point where he could barely use it. I had gathered all the combat strength that I could use. I didn't have the foolish habit of letting my opponent finish his transformation. Chapter 477. The demon egg was there, exuding boundless might. It was extremely ugly, but it gave off a strange sense of intimacy, as if its very existence was a natural law, a part of this purgatory. Cavendish unhesitatingly released his hostility and greatly increased his power, as if he was preparing for battle. Roland, stop hiding it. Her physical body's minimum level is that of a main god. As long as she obtains a portion of Cynthia's special powers and abilities, her combat strength will explosively increase. Even if her physical body won't be able to last much longer, hiding it now is the equivalent of suicide. I was rather hesitant, not because I was worried about how strong the opponent before me would be, but rather because I was hesitant about whether or not I should take the risk and use this opportunity to see Cavendish's maximum combat strength so that I could prepare myself for a possible future battle. However, I hesitated as I looked at the demon egg's increasing aura. The current situation had finally reached a balance, and it wouldn't be a good thing if Cynthia's backup physical body was too powerful. As for Cynthia's demon egg, I didn't really care because I had already thought of a way to defeat it, no matter how powerful it was. Explode, reality, cough cough, collapse hell. Along with my will, the entire hell began to collapse, shatter, and transform into dust. Soon, this dimension would be separated from the Hades, and the entire Hades would reject it as trash and toss it into the void. Naturally, the gigantic demon egg would also be tossed into the void. As for what else was in the void, and whether or not she would be able to return, since there were no precedents, and I didn't even know how harsh the void's environment was, I didn't know. If this had been any other chaos main god, the dimensional explosion wouldn't have been able to kill them. Instead, they would have been able to use this opportunity to enter deeper into hell. But right now, you're nothing more than a round egg. How can you possibly grow wings and fly? As for the gluttony's hell, and dang, just like the mountain inferno earlier, they could simply be regenerated. Who said that a boss transformation had to be fought head-on? Trying to transform into an egg in front of me, who had mastered the dimensional laws of space. Did you have a death wish? Since there's no rule that states that we must kill the other party, why don't we have a good fight? Cavendish's expression was very complicated, but more than that, he felt a sense of helplessness. It was as if he had already completed the tearful farewell ceremony, and the soldiers who were about to set out had just stepped onto the battlefield, only to be told that the battle had been temporarily canceled due to the rain. Very quickly, the black mist began to close up. Just as we heaved a sigh of relief, a strong sense of danger suddenly made all of us look towards the opening. F***CK. The egg really grew wings and flew away. Yes, the eggs were really flying. What kind of monster was it? Its egg form had been forcefully broken, and its unevolved internal organs, heart, and lungs were all exposed. Half of its body was still in the egg form, and the only parts that could be seen were probably one arm and two wings. The void was devouring the light, but the wings of light were unfolding mysteriously. 1, 2, 10, 100. Finally, countless wings of light covered the entire void. The void was now illuminated, and holy light illuminated every inch of it. Holy hymns echoed throughout the entire world. Even every corner of the Hades was playing the holy burial song from ancient epics. The light that leaked out of the canyon lit up the inferno. This light actually directly destroyed all the ghosts in the inferno. This was a light that was far purer and more holy than holy light. The goddess of chaos, the most ancient chaos that created the chaos abyss and demons, was actually so pure and holy. 10 million, 20 million, 100 million, 200 million. Pack, the combat strength measuring device, exploded. Although I was just casually saying this, I mysteriously felt astonished in my heart. I didn't even need to measure any combat strength or energy level. Just by looking and feeling, I was able to sense the tremendous difference between the creator goddesses of chaos and main gods. The difference between a creator and a creator? It's like an adult and an ant. Cavendish remained abnormally silent as he stared at the brightening sky. Then, a burning flame reignited in his eyes. This wasn't a negative emotion like anger or fear. Instead, it was a desire. He desired that he would one day surpass Cavendish. This was a type of delight. He was delighted that there was still a vast sky before him, that he could fly even higher. One annoying, hot-blooded type. With the goddess of creation being so powerful, it would seem that I'll need to revise my plans again. Just thinking about it is so troublesome. At this moment, I increasingly noticed that I was foundationally different from Cavendish. Perhaps this was the difference between Cavendish and I. When facing a powerful enemy, he would face them head-on, while I would think of ways to go around them or trap them. But now that I was facing an enemy that was nearly impossible to defeat, he happily accepted the future challenge and focused all his energy on becoming stronger. Meanwhile, I was trying to come up with all sorts of schemes and strategies to defeat him. It seems that he's the main character, while I'm on the wrong path. Still, I'm relaxed now. I understood Cavendish, just as Cavendish understood me. Although we were only cooperating for a short period of time, Cavendish had always desired to fight against me. This was an urge that stemmed from us sharing the same soul. He desired to defeat Cavendish in order to prove his own worth. He desired to prove that his path was stronger than Cavendish's, and he desired to prove that the quality of his soul was superior to Cavendish's. I guessed that he would still want to fight against me after all of this was over. But now that he could see an even higher mountain range, with his personality, he wouldn't come looking for trouble with me before he reached the peak. But I still can't avoid this battle. After all these miscellaneous matters are over, I can focus on improving my own personal strength. Otherwise, it would be far too embarrassing if Cavendish casually killed me. Even if I can't reach the goddess of creation's power level, I can't be too far away. I shook my head and dispelled these distracting thoughts. The opponent before me was our true goal. The creator goddesses of creation's power level was far too inconceivable. This completely surpassed any possibility of victory. Was this the reason why the game's history ended with everyone dying? Relax. She won't be able to return. There's no concept of space or time in the void. Only one's will can guide one's direction. Pure power is worthless. A physical body that can't be controlled by a divine soul can only remain where it is. Even if she's right in front of you, she'll still be far away. And soon, that physical body will naturally collapse. The sealed Hell's Maw seemed to be explaining my system's explanation. Cynthia's physical body didn't improve any further even after the entire sky was sealed. And so, the Battle of the Hades came to an end. That's right, it had come to an end. There was nothing else left that was worth recording. Sophocles the Deceiver was a bastard who had been tempted by Cynthia's promises of great benefits to the point that he tore apart the ceasefire agreement. The moment that I and Cavendish appeared and the Lord of Lies woke up from his slumber, Sophocles unhesitatingly signed an even harsher ceasefire agreement. As for us, even if we were displeased, we didn't want to push the main gods too far at this point in time. 2 of the 7 infernos were still being rebuilt. The completion of the Hades would be delayed by at least 1 or 2 years. If we destroyed one more, we would suffer even more losses. And the longer the Hades were delayed by 1 day, the situation in the mortal plane would be even worse. Chaos war god Donades. Cavendish ran over and said something to Donades, and they seemed to have come to an agreement. And so, the true battle became a battle to the death. Donades was addicted to fighting, and it would seem that he intended to use his actions to force Donades to his limits. Judging by this, I guess that Cavendish and Donades had long since been in cahoots with each other. At the very least, Donades' most loyal lackey of chaos actually seemed delighted after hearing about Cynthia's death. Even though we had come to an agreement, we still didn't hide our distrust of Donades and Donades. The three chaos main gods were all under our supervision. The demons were all waking up from their slumber, and the Queen of Temptations hid in Cavendish's embrace under the gazes of her comrades. Then, there were even more looks of dissatisfaction. Cough. I definitely wasn't envious or jealous of Donades. Stars also appeared in the sky above the Hades. The gods also began doing their jobs. Even the stars were spinning above the chaos main gods' heads. Everyone was still looking at the chaos main gods with a lack of trust in them. Everyone finally heaved a sigh of relief when the white figure on the boat reappeared on the river Styx. At this point, we no longer had to worry about the chaos main gods causing trouble. Ale, you've woken up. It was likely that even I had unknowingly become dependent on this figure. The black pillar that represented death and souls rose up once again. The pillar of ice, pillar of death, pillar of holy light, and pillar of law supported the entire Hades. The cycle of the Hades had now been completed, and the completion rate had greatly increased. Donades and Sophocles the Deceiver would remain in the world of the Hades. That was something that could only be done when the world of Ache and the world of the Hades were reconnected. Only then would they have a place to return to. Of course, there would always be a powerful force watching over them. If they showed any weakness, it would be the perfect time for them to die. At the very least, they definitely wouldn't have an easy time for the next few years. When the two towers completed Cavendish's task, Cavendish unhesitatingly dragged the pitifully screaming goddess into the void. His unhesitating footsteps and his final smile when he turned around told me that the next time we met, he would be even more powerful than he was now. At this point, the Battle of the Hades ended with the Hades faction's complete victory. History was now destined to be completely different. The future world would change from two factions fighting for supremacy to three factions fighting for supremacy. Perhaps everyone's fates would be different. As time passed, the seven rulers of hell revived one by one and ascended to the throne. The four halls of the Hades all began operating, and the devils diligently carried out their duties. A new cycle of reincarnation began. When the first baby was born in the land of spring, everyone, including the gods, was overjoyed. Our cycle of reincarnation had succeeded. Of course, other people told me about this later. After all, when I canceled my reverse god's descent with Womians, I naturally fell into an eternal slumber. As the pillar of law of the Hades, Womians would truly become an independent existence. After the Hades was completed, he was the embodiment of justice and selflessness, so he would naturally lose the concept of self. Womians had already transformed into the order of the Hades. The god of law in Hades was destined to become the strongest god in all the dimensions. However, this no longer had anything to do with me. The Hades had already been completed, and all the bugs would automatically be fixed. There would no longer be any need to consider the so-called god's descent anymore. Womians would become an independent existence. As for me, I had also obtained my freedom. At the very least, the Armageddon that was destined to be on my shoulders could now be removed. I could finally relax and enjoy a happy life. What? The future would still be harsh? This world didn't belong to me alone to begin with. It was probably more than enough that I had done so much and avoided total annihilation. I could leave the rest to the mortals. The gods of the Hades would help them overcome this difficult time. However, history and fate had already been completely rewritten. The amount of fate points I obtained from this would definitely be astronomical. There was also the god equipment that would definitely drop after I killed a main god. Unfortunately, My system still hadn't completed the final calculation even before I fell into an eternal slumber. Before I truly closed my eyes and fell into an eternal slumber, my system's next sentence made me feel rather uneasy. It seems that we've all been played by Cavendish. Cynthia's death will not only affect the Chaos Abyss, but the death of a main god will also weaken the entire dimensional barrier. It'll be even easier for dimensional invaders to enter. Our future won't be easy. All right then, it was fortunate that I hadn't listened to him about killing off the two creator goddesses. Wouldn't that have directly caused the dimensional barrier to shatter and caused a major dimensional war? The Chaos faction would probably have a great time fighting, as they would have even more opportunities to evolve. However, the entire world would probably be on the verge of collapse as it faced an unknown future. Cavendish, you're making me suffer again. Chapter 478. Things change every day these days. I really can't understand it. Yesterday, I heard that the Solid Duchy is at war again, and the price of food is going to skyrocket. Today, I heard that the drool invented a new crop, and the price of food plummeted. I had Carlo go to the neighboring town and pull a cart full of food, but he sold it before it even reached the warehouse. Behind the bar, Old Man Barton was wiping the plates while complaining that the world was changing so quickly that he, a retired warrior, could no longer understand it. It was already night, and it was raining cats and dogs outside. The raindrops pattered against the wooden windows and roof, and the heavy rain hit against the wine barrel sign of the bar, causing it to sway. The dim yellow oil lamp inside slightly illuminated the lobby of the Rhino Tavern. The half-elf bard was softly reciting a new war epic from a remote area, and the adventurers were quietly listening. Not only did this terrible weather make them have no plans to go out, but they also didn't have the mood to be as noisy as they used to be. Warming themselves by the fire, listening to music, and playing Gwent card was already the most extravagant enjoyment. Old Barton, it's not that I want to criticize you, but it's fine if you can't afford that machine that makes a sound just by shaking it. Nowadays, magic lamps are sold everywhere, and they only cost 2 energy coins a month. Why are you still using kerosene lamps that use up so much fuel and aren't bright? Are you still lacking these few coins in your coffin? Or are you planning to take advantage of Catalina's future husband? Even though Catalina was the bar girl, she was also the boss's precious adopted daughter, and she was the fuse that could be lit at any time. If anyone else had said this in front of Old Barton, he would have taught them a lesson a long time ago. This old dog still had some teeth. At this moment, the person who was joking casually was an old mercenary with gray eyebrows and hair. His silver emblem was engraved with a pair of wings. This was the emblem of a silver emblem mercenary. Only warriors who had made great contributions to the duchy had the chance to obtain it, and it was also proof of being an ace mercenary. It was clearly a waste of talent to be in a small town like this. His expensive magic spear was casually leaning against the bar counter, and on his arm, which was toasting to his heart's content, was the latest Explorer X4 Hero's Gauntlet, and on his waist were several of the latest miniature energy barrels. These were the standard equipment of Winston, the strongest mercenary in Anton. And the reason why he was able to joke around with Old Barton like this and not get thrown out by the hot-tempered old warrior was that the two of them used to be partners in the same mercenary group. I see that these engineers and mages aren't reliable. Can their things be trusted? Especially gnomes. Hey, you can't be. Do you still remember how you were screwed over by the goblin engineer? The other party sold you out that mechanical alarm clock. Oh, right. That's right. It's that mechanical clock. I still remember its auspicious name. What's it called again? Safe. The BR Brothers' safe alarm clock. Old Barton spat out these names one at a time. He still remembered the name of the producer, and it was obvious that he held a grudge. His memory was exceptionally deep. I remember again. That day, the alarm clock rang for almost half an hour, and we were all woken up. You were still hugging your pillow and drooling while saying, "Let me sleep for 5 more minutes," and then, seeing Old Barton's deathly pale face and seeing the red-haired waitress eavesdrop by wiping the table, Old Winston decided to save his old friend some face, considering that this bar was the only one in town that served dwarven spirits. Asterisk crack. Asterisk, all right, the old baldy crushed the plate himself. It was obvious that he remembered what happened that morning, and he lost control of the strength in his hand. Old Winston laughed so hard that he slumped over the table. At the end of the alarm clock's ringing, it gave a warning. It was a hoarse and ear-piercing recording. Even now, old Barton could still clearly remember that it was the sharp voice of a gnome. All right, you don't want to get up, but you actually look down on the safe alarm clock, the BR Brothers Goblin product. This alarm clock is angry. This alarm clock is about to explode. 54-9. The 50-second countdown was more than enough for the muddle-headed old warrior. Considering the gnome's reputation, if they said they would blow up a hole, they definitely wouldn't just blow up a hole. They could only blow up a dozen holes or even a canyon. The old warrior didn't hesitate to get out of bed and press the stop button on the alarm clock, and then 4-2 from... Obviously, this wasn't the stop button for the alarm clock bomb, and even after old Barton thoroughly searched through the alarm clock, he still couldn't find a second button to press. 3-2. Then, helpless, Barton could only painfully throw out the crappy thing I bought with a month's salary that was about to turn into a bomb. In the end, when the countdown ended, what he waited for wasn't an explosion, but another music recording. Huh, did you fall for it? You're finally awake, aren't you? Don't listen to those rumors. Our safe alarm clock is sturdy and reliable. We stopped making bombs a long time ago. All right, if this was the end of the matter, then so be it. After all this ruckus, he didn't need to sleep anymore. Perhaps old Barton would even appreciate the other party's sense of humor. The alarm clock really did work. Just as he took back the alarm clock, he discovered that a small crack had been smashed open on the alarm clock, and the hidden mechanism had been activated once again. Huh, you actually dare to pry into the BR Brothers' trade secrets. Taste the gnome's wrath. Barton still remembered that the high-pitched scream was filled with undisguised malice, and the wings of misfortune had already covered his head. Asterisk boom. Asterisk all right. There was no need to describe this familiar plot. The explosion wasn't that powerful, and old Barton wasn't that weak, but since the source of the explosion was right in front of him, the last few strands of hair and eyebrows of poor old Barton dissipated in the explosion. Then, he angrily ran over to question those green misers with no professional ethics. However, the gnome contract specialist received him in a refined manner and then chatted with him in a friendly and cordial manner. And so, first, he was confused by the large number of disclaimers hidden in the sales contract, and then he inexplicably had to pay some liquidated damages and fines for prying into trade secrets. In the end, the more he thought about it, the more he went to the gnome's door. Instead, he was inexplicably tricked into buying a large number of hair growth products. You don't say. Those hair growth products of yours are really effective. Asterisk crack. Asterisk, this was the second time that old man Barton had crushed a plate. He was already considering whether or not he should properly settle the score with his old friend. At the very least, when he woke up the next day and turned into a hairy ball, this old bastard was also smiling just as happily, and even dragged his friend to see the hairy gorilla. All right, it was no wonder that Barton hated gnome products so much. Back in the day, he bought a new toy for the sake of novelty. In the end, he didn't even pay for it, and he was tormented quite badly. His hair did grow back, but it was too frightening. In the end, he even had to spend money to buy the gnome's permanent hair loss agent. It was as if he had stepped into a pit one after another. In the end, the rock-heavy hammer, retired early. It was unknown whether it was because he was really old and weak like he said, or because he couldn't stand the ridicule of his brothers and the strange gazes of others. After all, not everyone could remain calm on a face that was as clean as an egg. Every time the people in front of him inexplicably burst into laughter, his old face couldn't stay there any longer. Right. Has the permanent hair loss agent lost its effectiveness? How did your eyebrows grow? Puffed. No way, fake eyebrows. Isn't that another goblin product? Old friend, don't you hate goblin products? Asterisk boom. Asterisk, all right, this time the old friend directly pulled out the war hammer that he had placed under the bar counter. He waved the silver weapon around and chased the blabbermouthed silver emblem mercenary all over the bar. As for the regular customers of the bar, They were already used to this daily clamor. They cheered the boss on while requesting the bar to change to a fast-paced song. Those who stayed in a bar instead of a warm home in this horrible weather were either adventurers or mercenaries who had no fixed abode, or old drunkards who were hopelessly poisoned by alcohol. Unfortunately, unlike the previous times when the boss won a complete victory, this time, old Barton panted heavily as he chased Winston for a dozen or so laps. He suddenly stopped and looked thoughtfully at Winston, who was completely fine. "You old bastard? You've reached the threshold of the legend rank." "Yeah, I just touched it 2 days ago. I came all the way here just to show off to you." Hearing this, Barton was stunned at first, but his tightly clenched fists relaxed once more. They'd been brothers for so many years, so there was no need to take him seriously. It was just an effective way of provoking him. And even though his old friend took the opportunity to invite him to come out of retirement again, he still gave the same answer. "Oomph, even this guy can become a legend. This damn world, this old bastard can't understand it anymore. It's easier to just stay here and run a bar." It seemed that Winston's persuasion had failed again. The old mercenary shrugged. This was to be expected. Barton the Stubborn Rock was a nickname that said he was as stubborn as a rock. "You old bastard, you're only 45 years old. Don't call me an old bastard. Did you hear? The wood spirits have started selling their holy water of youth. It only costs 100 justice points, and that's 2 years of youth. Who knows, you might even become a legend. Not interested. If you say such nonsense again, next time your dwarven thunder spirit will only have water and no wine." This was obviously not empty talk, but a real threat. Sensing that his old friend was really angry, Winston shook his head and lowered his head to focus on drinking. It was no wonder that old Barton was so resistant to new magical equipment. This world was changing too quickly. There were many people like him who couldn't adapt. In fact, if it weren't for certain reasons, Winston would have already reached the age of retirement, according to past practice. Old Winston was already over 48 years old. Under normal circumstances, a human warrior would be at their peak around 35 years old. After 40 or so, all aspects of the body would rapidly deteriorate. If they couldn't enter the gold rank by then, they could forget about it for the rest of their lives. But with the arrival of the Great Era, with the help of the crazily rising elemental tide and all sorts of precious resources obtained from the contract hero system, not only did he enter the gold rank in just 2 years, he even reached the threshold of legend in his 7th year. And so, while he was pleasantly surprised, the old man was also tempted. He ambitiously hoped to pull his old friend out of retirement again. But unfortunately, while some people were happy because of the arrival of the Great Era, others always faced changes in their worldview and were unable to adapt. Yes, the Great Era, the New Dawn Era, FT. Although most people were still used to using the old calendar AD 1905, as the Church of Law and the Church of Hades expanded day by day, the Dawn Era they advocated was accepted by more and more people. And now it was already the 7th year of the new era, FT7. The people of HE were getting more and more used to this new world that constantly refreshed their worldview. That's right, even the term worldview was spread by the Church of Law. In the past few years, there have been too many such new concepts and terms. In the past few years, as the elemental tide rose, the number of spellcaster talents that were rarely seen in the past had increased tenfold. Even a pure warrior like Winston had inexplicably learned a few magical sword techniques. He had even considered selling off the antiques in his house and replacing them with a real magical long spear. In the past few years, the silver rank, which was the limit for mortals in the past, had been broken. Gold rank masters suddenly became worthless. In fact, even a number of legends had become so numerous that the people of the world were thinking of reconsidering how they should be addressed. Of course, these new powerhouses who didn't even know their own path and didn't even have a soul imprint were far weaker than the veteran powerhouses. But enough numbers could make up for everything. In the past few years, the map could be rewritten 3 times a week. Dimensional invaders and dimensional cracks were as common as cockroaches. It was disgusting. The entire plane could be said to have sunk into the chaos of war. If it wasn't for the fact that the population of the mortal plane had greatly increased, this world might have already been beyond salvation. In the past few years, the technological revolution that had started in the Northlands had become more and more intense. Magical engineering technology had already changed the lives of mortals and the normal state of war. Ordinary families now had magical lamps, and mortal warriors had begun experimenting with magical swords and magic spears. New transportation equipment made trading of goods easier and faster. Armies and armies had even begun a magical mechanization revolution. Winston, who had adapted to the changes of the times, had already gone further and further. If he still insisted on his old lifestyle like old Barton, he was probably destined to be eliminated. In the past few years, there had been countless changes. No one could be sure if this was a good or bad thing. But no matter what the changes were, life had to continue. Gold had to be earned, land had to be farmed, and wine had to be drunk. Some things were gone forever, but some things were still the same as before. Asterisk ding. Crack. Asterisk. The sudden sound of the doorbell interrupted old Barton's reminiscence. The three cloaked figures who entered attracted his attention. Their soaked cloaks caused rainwater to drip onto the floor, and their heavy anti-skid rain boots made clacking noises as they stepped on the floor. Traveling in this kind of weather wasn't something most people wanted to do. The owner glanced at them, then lowered his head and focused on his work. No matter what, they were just new customers. As long as they didn't cause trouble, he would still welcome them. Hey, look. That black skin and the inverted cross emblem. It's the anti-holy knight. Silver scales and black skulls holy emblem. And there's an important figure from the Church of Law. What are they doing in our rural area? Wow, a silver cross sword? 3 holes in the magic box. That should be the newest model of magic swords, right? Didn't they say that they weren't for sale for the Northlands' military use? Could it be those fellows from the Northlands? But after taking off their waterproof cloaks, they attracted the attention of all the customers. A combination of a dark elf, a human, and a gnome wasn't common. The instant the owner saw the gnome, he decided to add 50% water to the wine and double the price of the dishes. Then, he arranged for the gnome to stay in the empty room where the person who died 2 days ago had died. Perhaps it could even exorcise evil. But the 3 new customers didn't seem to have any intention of ordering food. Instead, they walked directly to the notice board in the middle of the bar. That was the place where mercenaries in the town were issued employment missions. The gnome from the Church of Law tiptoed and tore down one of the wanted posters, only to paste another one on it. At first, the others were looking on with interest, looking forward to the mission of these important figures. But when they saw the new wanted poster, they all shook their heads and went back to what they were doing. After all, no matter how attractive the reward was, a mission that was impossible to complete was meaningless. This mission had been on the wanted list from FT5 to FT7. Not only was there no news at all, but if they had only found him based on the vague information on the wanted poster, they would have long since become the world's top detective. Wanted poster, Roland. Gender, male, age, 5 to 60 years old. Hair color, blonde, possibly dyed. Height, uncertain, no obvious characteristics on the body. Appearance, unknown, usually looks weak, but could be in disguise. Immune to all detection spells. Might have a black cat or other ghostly things by his side. Might be a warrior or a holy knight. There's also the possibility of a law job, necromancer, ice mage. Of course, he could also be in disguise as another job. That guy could do it. Strength rating, unknown. Please form a team with any job class below legend rank. As long as he's alive, we'll be troubled if he dies again. Right? He doesn't have a sense of humor at all. He only knows how to tell cold jokes. All right then. So people could die again after they died. It would be a miracle if they could find Roland on this wanted poster that incited everyone's desire to comment. Still, many people were tempted and took action. After all, the rewards were far too tempting. Reward: 2 million gold coins, 50,000 justice points, friendship with the Mist Alliance, the Church of Law in Hades, the Absolute Gentleman Mercenary Group, and a request that doesn't violate basic morals. Gold coins and justice points could only be used to move powerful individuals. But the current Mist Alliance had already transformed from a small border country into a mega empire. The Church of Law in Hades was the Mist Alliance's official religion, as well as one of the strongest churches in the world. And after the Absolute Gentleman mercenary group's core members suddenly returned 2 years ago, they were now unquestionably the #1 mercenary group in the world. Their friendship and one request was more than enough to move an entire country. Obviously, these three esteemed guests weren't here to look for Roland. After all, finding Roland had mysteriously become one of the 10 most difficult epic rank quests to complete in the world by the fairies. They were simply here to update this wanted poster that had already been posted all over the world. This time, apart from increasing the reward from 2 million to 3 million and increasing the amount of justice points from 50,000 to 80,000, there was also a new sentence added at the end of the wanted poster. Roland, if you don't voluntarily turn yourself in within 1 year, will publicize all the treasures on the A17 bookshelf in your underground library. The fairies will prepare a special issue just for you. Everyone else glanced at the wanted poster and immediately left. However, a drunkard named Caro, who lived in a bar for a long time, was shocked awake. He was so shocked that his signature beard almost fell to the ground. A17. Isn't that an erotic novel that I wrote based on real people? There's even my special hardcore Pointiest drawings. Marguerite, Eliza, Harloise, they'll kill me. Bastard. There's even one for me. You even dared to do something to a banshee back in the day. Cough. A ghost story is a classic theme. There's plenty of ways to play it. Let go, don't bite me. Actually, there are almost all the beautiful female goddesses on the list. You're going to be hunted down by the goddesses after the list is publicized, right? I'm not angry because the goddess of order isn't on the list. Hey. It's not appropriate for you to act like it's Sundra at such a time. Tui, don't talk to me, you old virgin. Harloise, let me tell you, an old virgin who's been holding back for too long can be quite perverted. Roland has lived for more than 300 years and has long since reached the point of no stoop. His story about you is quite a classic. Even I can't understand how he came up with such a story. It's a combination of sadomasochism, hardcore, and icy love, surpassing any other work of his. My dear Astria, are you hungry? I'll cook some noodles for you. Chapter 479. Carlo. Last name and age unknown. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a full beard that obscures his face, but his voice sounds younger than his appearance. I don't know when he appeared in the Rhino Bar, but he's been there for almost half a year. He's good at cheating, nicknamed Tavergod of Gamblers. He never does any serious work, and his main income is the money he wins from gambling with adventurers. He's especially good at Gwent, Hearthstone, and other cards. As for why he's good at cheating, it's because he wins and loses in the process of playing cards with him. In the end, you'll definitely be the one who loses, but because the process is thrilling and interesting, he doesn't lose much each time. There are always some bored people who are willing to give him money. But he was too ruthless in killing outsiders some time ago, so the old drunkards all discovered his tricks. He won't be able to make any money for a while. Usually, he does odd jobs for the boss, old Barton, to pay for alcohol and accommodation. It seems that he's very interested in the owner's daughter, Catalina, but she's never been nice to him. Looking at the information he bought from the local thieves' guild, the Goblin Inquisitor, Saul, shook his head. Over the past half a year, it had become a habit for him to inquire about unknown adventurers who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But when he thought of that person's information, that metal that seemed to have become an epic character, and compared it to the drunkard in front of him who had been in the tavern for half a year, he shook his head. It seemed that his luck wasn't good enough, and he still came up empty this time. Next, let's prepare for the investigation mission in front of us. Such a remote town without any special resources, but there's actually a blood sacrifice of evil cultists. Something's not right there. As an inquisitor who had just graduated from Nanxiang's accelerated course, Saul seemed too young to be on the front lines. If it were those old foxes from the era of the Four Halls of Justice, seeing Carlo's information, they would immediately be interested, because they knew that their old superior, who sounded like he was famous, was definitely not some honorable hero. It was completely possible for him to owe a tavern money for half a year, or use gambling debts to pay for alcohol. However, if it was really those wily old foxes, they wouldn't even think about looking for someone because they knew that not only was it impossible to complete this mission, but even if they were lucky enough to complete it, it might not be a good thing. First of all, if that person really wanted to hide, it would depend entirely on luck to find him. Even if he really bumped into him, not only would he be able to escape, he wouldn't even be able to stop him. And even if he was lucky enough to catch him, no matter how good the reward was, it wouldn't be enough to stop that person's vicious revenge. No matter how one looked at it, it was a trap for them to win or lose such a mission. Thus, for the wily old foxes of the Church of Law, the Find Roland mission was just an interesting topic for idle chatter. Only the newly minted youngsters would take their superiors' #1 mission seriously. Of course, they naturally became the targets of the wily old foxes. This legend was still being spread among the recruits of the Church of Law, the Gentleman's Alliance, and the Mist Kingdom's Knight Corps. Go find the legendary hero Roland. Our church is longing for his return. This is a test for youngsters. As long as you find him, you will receive his recognition, grudge, and reward, revenge. You will also receive the world's one and only 10th circle incantation, the ultimate shoe imprisonment spell, literal meaning. Saul, who had only been on the job for 2 months and had just completed a mission by himself, was obviously the target who was being fooled. He also completely believed it, or else he wouldn't have carried the newest wanted poster with him. What Saul didn't know was that they, who had only been in the Rhino Tavern for a day, had already been seen through by the target they were looking for. In one of the tavern's rooms, they were currently being discussed by their target. Silver-ranked Inquisitor, gold-ranked Anti-Knight, and 4 elemental swordcasters. The one leading them should be that Anti-Knight. They're missing a Holy Knight to form the most popular 4-plate armor combination. Together, they should be able to take care of a high-level demon. Judging from their target, they should be here to investigate the Death Council that has been getting more and more rampant lately. Whenever the world encountered danger, the first to rampage wasn't the enemy, but rather the messy, evil cults. They used the world's turmoil and the fear in the hearts of the people to wantonly spread their own beliefs, creating even more panic and chaos for their own benefits. However, there were gods and demons in this world, so the organizers of evil cults weren't limited to just mortals. If the mastermind behind the scenes was pulled out from the gutter, it would most likely be related to some big shot from the lower planes or other planes. The full name of the Death Council was All Things Die Council. It was a religion that came from the lower planes that worshipped death itself. However, when it spread to the main plane, it had already gone astray. The current religion was all life will perish in the Armageddon. Only by transforming into undead creatures can one survive the Armageddon. Doesn't that make people speechless? In fact, I've seen many more evil cults that are even more outrageous than this. Just by looking at this religion, I can guarantee that this evil cult definitely had something to do with those undead emperors. Following the successful descent of that undead emperor a year ago, the undead calamity in the main plane was indeed becoming more and more intense. Those fellows from the Death Council were also becoming more and more rampant. If I left them alone, it was possible that a village would become a dead village after some time. The undead calamity would also gain new troops, and it was even possible that plagues and dimensional doors leading to the undead planes would appear. That was why whenever the Death Council appeared, the gods' churches and countries would often send out investigators to clean them up. In the game's history, there were also quite a few evil cults that appeared. No matter what their initial goal was, their final goal was to create all sorts of blood sacrifices and evil rituals in order to attract the big shots of the Chaos Abyss to come to this plane and start a holy war. And after the will of the Chaos Abyss disappeared, the Chaos Lords and evil gods obtained freedom and became more and more active. Evil cults also increased in number. However, it was difficult to say what their final goal was. At the very least, I hadn't seen so many strange evil cults in the game's history. Fisherman Die, it was a rather strange name. It was said that this evil cult believed that fish are the purest creatures and that all fishermen should die. Those bastards who cooked fish soup should go to the 18th level of hell. Their main worshippers were fishmen and water-type creatures. They developed quite well in swamps and lakes. At first, I felt that this was quite inconceivable. But when I found out that the person behind this evil cult was the son of the person who had been cooked into fish soup, I suddenly felt that it was understandable. For the sake of world peace, let's cook less fish soup. I mysteriously felt a resonance with this cult's teachings, especially when I heard that Cavendish felt that his failure was rather embarrassing. So he went back to the same old location to fish several times and cook fish soup several times. This caused the Chaos Abyss's leader to change several times. I felt even more sympathy for this evil cult that had unknowingly changed its backer several times. Right? Among all the evil cults, there was one called the Church of Bliss that was especially attention-grabbing. Their teachings were, the end of the world is right in front of us. Let's throw away all our unnecessary morals and pour all our limited energy into endless sex. It was said that all the priests of this evil cult were young and beautiful girls, and that their sacrificial activities were something to be envied. I mean evil and depraved. There were even quite a few cute elven girls among the participants. It was said that the leader behind this cult came from a certain level of the Chaos Abyss, and that he created this evil cult out of pure interest. He also used his own incarnation to participate in such activities, and it was said that the incarnation was a very attractive girl. Unfortunately, I had never been able to find their church. Ahem. Would you believe me if I said that I only want to eradicate the evil church? If I tell you that the day you find the Elysium Club is the day Eliza finds you, I will never tell anyone about it. Do you believe me? I'd be a fool to believe you. Same here. Now that I was all alone, I was being ridiculed by the soul-bound silly cat. You won't consider going back? Even if the reward is 10 times higher, I will still... You won't be tempted? No. Find someone to help me kidnap him and take the reward. I'll run after I get the reward. Don't you have the pride of an epic hero? Did you know that the undying Roland has already been named one of the top 10 epic heroes of the past 1,000 years by the fairies? Pride? Can it be eaten? Can it be exchanged for alcohol? Of course, ridiculing me was one thing. As for me, I actually have my own thoughts as well. Leave the affairs of mortals to the mortals. I've already done so much. If they still can't deal with me, they'll be too useless. Before entering the underworld, I had already thought things through very clearly. My subordinates have long since reached the age where they can take charge of their own affairs. If an old fellow like me were to constantly point here and there, it would instead hinder their growth. We've already endured for more than 5 years. If something were to happen, it would have happened long ago. Since everything is fine, it means that the youngsters are quite capable. As an old fellow who retired long ago, there's no need for me to jump out at such a time to annoy others. There might even be people who say that I'm trying to seize power. The world was huge. What could an individual's combat strength change? The changes that could be made had already been made. The seeds that had been sown had already sprouted. All that was left was anticipation. Yep, not laziness, but anticipation. Do your best, mortal. Big Brother is watching over you. That was why I had more than enough confidence to ignore the existence of the wanted order. It was just that the newest threat was giving me a headache. Considering that Eliza was most likely involved in the matter of being able to enter my underground library, I decided to take some time to write a threatening letter to the Church of Law. If she dared to publicize it, I would publicize the embarrassing fact that she still wet her bed at 6 years old, and that she still didn't dare to sleep alone at 9 years old. I suddenly sympathized with Eliza. Can't you have a little more EQ and a little more sense of responsibility? Actually, none of you understand the depth of my love. Child, one day my life will come to an end, and all of you will be crowned as kings, kings, kings. Who's throwing stinky boots at me? I didn't even get to finish saying the word king before the white cat's flying boots shattered it. Yep, the white cat. I thought that the silly cat had become the white cat because of that ridiculous wanted order. Aren't you just planning to openly slack off? What's the point of coming up with so many excuses? Mortal wisdom. How can you casually say something like slacking off? You should say that you trust your companions and juniors. Also, please call me Roland, the Freedom Knight who pursues justice and fairness. I'm an independent knight who travels with the wind. I'm not loyal to any noble faction, and I only fight for the justice in my heart. Why do I feel like you're ridiculing me again for no reason? Humph. I'm a man who wants to become a Freedom Knight. One day, I'll find my own elven girl. I have no idea what you're talking about. Did you take the wrong medicine? This joke is way too revealing of your age. Be careful that others don't understand. However, time seemed to have proven my choice. My wish from 7 years ago had become a reality. Although it would be extremely irresponsible to leave someone else in charge, this opportunity to be independent indeed gave those talented people a chance to show off their abilities. The construction of the Hades took a total of 5 years. These 5 years were also the years when the Holy War began and the era changed the most rapidly. This was also a test for those young leaders. Even though I had just returned to the mortal world, I heard that they were doing quite well. The Mist Alliance in the Northlands was protected by 2 queens. The Northlands' Mist Sisters' reputation had spread far and wide. Since the entire world was in chaos and war, the Northlands' Mist Alliance that still had time to support other countries became especially special. The Northlands' Mist Alliance was flourishing, powerful, and just. The Northlands' Mist Alliance was becoming more and more prosperous. In this generation, the other side of being powerful and famous meant a stable living environment and endless business opportunities. Compared to the countries that were constantly suffering from the fires of war, the land that was covered in ice and snow seemed to be much more adorable. This was especially so with the development of magical engineering technology and the combined forbidden spells of the Northlands elves, which made the cruel natural environment seem less frightening. In a world of chaos and war, having a peaceful land was an attractive advantage. Countless merchants and people migrated here. The tremendous profits from the arms trade, plus the strong alliance with Alland, Bardi, and other countries helped the Mist Alliance, which no longer had to worry about the future, to become a new mega-empire. The Mist Alliance was now viewed as a new mega-empire. Of course, the Mist Alliance was able to maintain peace in the midst of war. Apart from the fact that the Mist Alliance had no value, it was also because this was the headquarters of the Church of Law in the Hades. Causing trouble here would be the equivalent of directly provoking the entire Hades faction. Even the Chaos main gods would have to think twice before acting. The internal structure of the Church of Law was stable. In fact, they didn't even need an especially outstanding leader. And with the establishment of the Hades, the God of Law had transformed into a concrete Church of Hades. The saying that anyone who did evil in life would be punished in death was no longer an empty saying. As the Church of Law and the God of Hades, it was only natural that they would become more and more influential. The foundational reason for their increasing influence was the rise of the Hades faction and the fact that Womians had become a main god. As the ruler of the Hades, after the Hades fully matured, the eternally just Womians absorbed countless believers and the power of law, becoming the second existence to become a main god in this holy war. Meanwhile, the Hades faction had become a neutral third party with at least 5 main gods. Even though most of these main gods were unable to leave the Hades faction, they were still a real threat. Perhaps it was precisely because of this astonishing power that the Order gods, who were already in endless trouble, didn't turn against the Order gods. They still maintained a faintly discernible cooperative relationship with the Hades faction, which allowed the Chaos main gods to actively avoid the Northlands. At least for now, the 3 factions seemed to have reached a balance. Even if this balance was destined to be torn apart by one faction, it still gave Aichi and the others more time to prepare and adapt. The God of Law who successfully became a main god also helped the Law Job class members to become even stronger. Due to the activity of law believers and law job class members, their teachings were becoming more and more popular in war-torn areas. Neutrality, non-aggression, instant learning, and other job class characteristics tempted many countries that lacked combat strength and public security. Some countries even chose to accept the laws of the Holy Scriptures as proof of governance. Law schools with extremely low barriers were also established in various countries. Law job class members who were eternally on the side of good also began to become popular among adventurers who leaned more towards justice. Of course, if a team always walked on the edge of the law, a just knight would be far more dangerous than a holy knight. If one didn't want to become a former knight, then law job class members would have to adhere to the laws themselves. The law job class didn't have high requirements for one's education level and combat talent, nor did law job class members require large amounts of resources and money like other job classes. The law job class's most important aspect was whether or not the law job class would be able to adhere to the laws to protect themselves and others. The incredibly low barrier to entry caused law job class members to become more and more numerous. Many guards in remote towns could also be seen trying to become self-taught by law. The Absolute Gentleman Alliance received endless news, with some good and some bad. The best news was that 2 years ago, when the Hades and the Mortal Plane were re-established, a large number of powerful mercenaries and knights returned to the Mortal Plane. The worst news was that a certain Draken inconceivably reached semi-god rank and even obtained the abnormal title of Mother of All Beasts. It's fine if he successfully reached semi-god rank. I wouldn't be surprised no matter what that bastard does. I can understand if he's the king of all beasts, but what does Mother of All Beasts mean? Forget it, there's no need to tell me the answer. At any rate, he's definitely some blind idiot. That's why this news is only bad news. He created some evil cults and spread some new beliefs. He actually has quite a few believers. Yep, I won't go into the specifics. All you need to know is that he successfully entered the top 10 of the Calamity rankings and became the target of every country's assassination. It would seem that leaving him in a mortal plane to help manage the overall situation back then was definitely a mistake. There were far too many changes that could be described in one night. Although there was plenty of good news, it was nothing compared to the tremendous changes in the entire world. Countless historical heroes had stepped onto the stage that belonged to them. War became the cruelest cradle of all. Many influences caused the entire world's direction to become uncertain. This was also why old Barton complained that he couldn't keep up with the times. Of course, none of this had much to do with me. Right now, my goal was to enjoy life, slack off, and have fun. Just like those students who had finally passed their college entrance exams and survived that living hell, I had already completed my mission. Even if the sky collapsed, let me have fun first. Caro, you're so bored talking to a cat. Did you steal some alcohol to drink again? I'll give you a small mission to earn some alcohol money. These lords are investigating a case in town. You're familiar with the area, so help them guide you. What? Chapter 480. The investigation quickly entered a difficult situation. Judge Saul fell into deep thought as he faced a large pile of information in front of him. He constantly recalled the information he gathered in the morning and finally made his final judgment. There's only one truth. That murderer is the most unlikely one. Yep, it's me. I'm the investigator. The young Saul wore thick glasses. He gently pushed them up, and something seemed to flash. His wise gaze had already pierced through countless obstacles and directly pointed out the truth. Wait, something doesn't seem right. As if even he himself felt that this conclusion was absurd, he hurriedly took out his work manual and searched for the working rules that he should follow at this time. His two companions exchanged glances and shook their heads helplessly. After exchanging their gazes, the dark elf Knight Tiana directly spoke up. Forget it. I'll do the investigation. Originally, it was because you're a judge. The rest of the sentence didn't need to be said. It was already rare for a dark elf to show some mockery, and it was also rare to see a goblin with a green face blush. To think that such a pure goblin existed in this world. It was a rare treasure. On the other side, even though it was only through Harlow East's little trick of spying on Saul, I already had the urge to cover my face and cry. This was simply embarrassing for me. How could such a clown be sent to handle a case on his own? The military police? The political commissar? There's a traitor here. This is the person you brought out? This is the kind of trash your court and law school brought out? The silly cat didn't disappoint me and added insult to injury. However, I could more or less guess why he would make such an outrageous decision. In a way, it really did have something to do with me. Don't misunderstand. I definitely wouldn't write a stupid rule like if the murderer can't be found, the investigator will be the murderer in my work manual. You should be a student of a crash course. There is indeed a clause in the case handbook that says suspecting everyone is the best solution to avoid logical blind spots. But he obviously misunderstood it. Either he was fooled by his seniors, or clap. In his panic, Saul accidentally dropped another small book on the ground. The bookmarks scattered all over the floor. However, the title of the book made me feel helpless. Forever Detective Coco by Roland. Either that, or I've been poisoned by those damn detective novels. Stop complaining. I know this is my own doing. How would I know which idiot would make such nonsense out of boredom into the Roland series? This is just an entertaining detective novel. It's just for entertainment. Professionals shouldn't take it seriously. You even put in bookmarks and notes to use as a reference book? The ever just woomyans. Hurry up and drag this idiot back to the furnace to be reforged. I can't take it anymore. Mary, the 4 elemental swordsman, couldn't stand it anymore. She picked up the novel helplessly. She and Anti-Knight Tiana were already old partners. This time, they had to investigate the Hidden Death Council. Considering that they might need the assistance of a law profession, they had requested assistance from their superiors. In the end, they had been sent such a useless person. Isn't this a novel? But didn't the seniors say that when we encounter a case that is too complicated, we can find inspiration from this novel? This was the work of that lord. I've learned more than 300 ways to murder. I think I hit the wall, really. You've encountered those strange and troublesome killing methods in real life. Would a normal person use such a troublesome method to resurrect? It's really just an entertainment novel. How does it feel to be so trusted by Junior? As expected, it's your own fault again. How does it feel? Right now, I really felt that I should have thrown these two into the Hades. I really couldn't take this double barrage. Tiana and Mary looked at each other. Nothing needed to be said. All right, as expected, newbies aren't reliable. Don't count on it. Do it yourself. The two of them quickly organized the relevant information and began to talk about the case and the related parties. Goblin Sawyer also knew that he had embarrassed himself greatly this time, so he could only watch from the side. There were a total of 7 sacrifices in the 3 surrounding towns. Many of the victims' families were sacrificed. The total number of victims was 27. In the past 6 months, there were 12 strangers. Among them, there were no guarantors or family members. Their actions were suspicious and obviously suspicious. The 2 female knight and swordsmen seemed to be in their 20s. I probably hadn't met them before. It was highly likely that they were only semi-newbies who had only been working for 2 or 3 years. However, they at least had the ability to organize files and information. But the owner of the bakery in the neighboring town is very suspicious. His wife was killed 3 months ago, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't sad at all. When we went to investigate, he kept staring at us. Yeah, I think so too. When we suddenly turned around after we left, he was still staring at us. That shifty look in his eyes told me that he wasn't a good person. Perhaps he had a guilty conscience. Let's add him to the list of suspects. The two of them had a lively discussion. Even Harloise was a little hesitant as she asked me, "Is that bakery owner really an evil cult member?" No. As for why his wife wasn't sad, you haven't seen his wife before. She looks just like an enlarged version of a goblin. Every time old Mike gets drunk, he would cry about how he was forced onto the bridge by his wife's tyrannical daughter, and how he was beaten by his wife at home. I always felt that it was already very kind of him not to celebrate his wife's death with gongs and drums. Why was he staring at them? Wasn't it because he had a guilty conscience? With a wife like that, it's normal for him to be a pervert who sneaks glances at beautiful women. Besides, it's their fault for dressing like that without any self-awareness. Didn't you notice that all those young men are sneaking glances at them? If we add them to the list of suspects based on this standard, it'll probably be filled up immediately. In front of Mary's chest was the mercenary emblem of the Absolute Gentleman Alliance. She was also wearing a female outfit prepared for the 4 elemental swordcasters. The 4 elemental swordcasters were magical swordsmen and didn't need to wear heavy armor for the sake of flexibility. After all, they could wear very little, and the higher-ups of the Gentleman Alliance were all. Yeah, everyone understood. The outer layer was a silver enchanted chainmail. The inner layer was a skin-tight shirt that was specially woven to accentuate certain parts of the body. The long red and blue windbreaker covered the entire body. Not being able to see, it was even more eye-catching than seeing it. Rather than calling it a warrior's armor, it was more like an evening dress for a ball. Overall, it was fashionable and modern, sexy yet not vulgar. It completely surpassed the aesthetic standards of this era and was a rare masterpiece. As for the anti-knight, it was even more ridiculous. The elegant and beautiful silver armor covered most of the vital parts of the body, but revealed some unimportant parts, such as the absolute domain where the thighs and torso met. The arms revealed 2 fingers and elbows, the chest revealed the back of the neck, and the chest revealed the lower abdomen. The entire armor was completely different from the traditional barrel structure. However, the outer appearance of the armor made it seem like an elegant silver robot lady. The lines were elegant and gentle, and when paired with the parts that were revealed, coupled with the natural charm of the dark elves, it had a depraved sense of beauty. TSK, as expected of dark elves, daring to wear anything. Does this have nothing to do with you? The silly cat always had a sharp sense in strange places. How would I know that they would really make it? This set can be made into 2 sets of full body armor. Seriously. Waist. Well done. My friend. I did my best to give a thumbs up, and it was as if Adam's flashing smile appeared in the sky. Why did it have to be Adam? Because I had only shown those designs to Adam, and he was definitely in cahoots with those fellows from the Gentleman Alliance. He was probably the only one who could make the serious Diana decide on such an armor design. Why did it have to be an illusion in the sky? I didn't think that Marguerite would spare his life after making such an item. At this point, I was inexplicably looking forward to the uniforms of the female judge, law incantationer, and justice knight. But when I thought about how Lilith was probably in charge now, I felt an inexplicable sadness that made me feel somewhat disappointed. Wait a moment, Lilith's sexual orientation is a bit off. Perhaps it's a good thing. Cough. Getting back to the main topic, judging from a mithril and rare alloys used, this equipment wasn't just for the sake of aesthetics. Its performance definitely wouldn't be bad. At this moment, the 2 girls were still arguing about the suspects that they were talking about, while Harloise began guessing with great interest. They're talking about that middle-aged guard from our town? The one who always glares at them with hatred? No, he's just an old pervert. He's cross-eyed and looks at everything like he's glaring at someone. The Andy who washes clothes by the river is also a secret watcher. No, the others only want to ask where they bought their clothes, but they're too embarrassed to approach them. After all, in their eyes, these rookies are all important people. That little apprentice from the tailor's shop. Same reason. She wants to make 2 replicas and sell them for money. How do you know so much? Humph. They paid me to help them ask, and they sold the same information 7 or 8 times. They finally have money for today's drinks. You're so free. The guard of Phoenix Feather Town? He's always sneaking around the streets at night. He's a hunchback, and he's on night duty. Is it a crime to go shopping or take a stroll at night? One suspect after another was listed. There were already more than 30 people on the other side's list, but I had already rejected all of them. Finally, the silly cat lost all her patience. Just who is it? I don't know. Don't bite me. All right, let me explain. I've been leading the way for the past 2 days, so of course they wouldn't be able to find me. You intentionally avoided the real culprit? Why? Do you think I'm that free? The easiest way to find a necromancer is to have another necromancer look for me. The members of the Death Council definitely practice necromancy, and they have death magic on them. Even though I'm in such a weak state right now, I'll definitely be able to sense it as long as I face them. If I see them, I'll definitely cut them down with my sword. Since they asked me to lead the way, they naturally won't be able to find them. The silly cat suddenly fell silent. After a while, She squeezed out a sentence. Why do I feel like they're destined to be scammed the moment they met you? Are you sure you didn't think that their tips were good, so you wanted to earn more money for drinks? Are you sure you don't have any other methods to find that guy? Roland, why are you sweating? Are you feeling guilty? It's hot. It's autumn now. Chapter 481. With the first glimmer of dawn, the open space in front of the Rhino Bar was already bustling with noise. There were some stones, straw dolls, archery targets, and other simple exercise equipment in the open space. Old Barton wasn't too bad. As long as it was a customer of the Rhino Bar, they could use it for free. Sometimes, when he was bored, he would go on stage and give some pointers. For adventurers who were motivated to improve themselves, it was impossible for them to sleep until dawn before they retired. Life wasn't a game, and those freaks who relied on completing quests and killing monsters to obtain EXP for no reason didn't exist in real life. Well, there was still a bug in the game. Ahem, for the vast majority of people, the insights gained from battles in life and death were indeed the turning point for a breakthrough. However, if one only relied on the sparks on the battlefield to seek improvement, it would not be enough no matter how many lives one had. Moreover, since it was an epiphany to make a breakthrough, it naturally required sufficient accumulation, and that accumulation naturally required the study and cultivation of the past. Although spellcasters needed enough sleep, it had become a routine to analyze spells every morning when they were in the best state. Most priests had to pray to the gods at dawn, as if they were paying respects to the gods for their divine power. But in this aspect, the priests and judges of the law class were different. Law professionals didn't need to pay respects to Woomians in the morning and report to him at night. They only needed to study and believe in the law itself. In this aspect, they were more like mages who also had intelligence as their main attribute. But although it was troublesome for priests to pray, compared to other professions, it was extremely easy. From the sound of the law reciting in the goblin room on the second floor of the bar, Saul, who became more and more aware of his own shortcomings as he adventured, didn't waste any time. And from the lights that didn't go out until 3 or 4 in the morning, the goblin judges, who had just lost face yesterday, seemed to have a sense of bravery after knowing their shame. However, just like how mages only read book knowledge and studied theories, they wouldn't be able to improve much. Mages needed to use experiments to verify their own theories and practice to prove their own deductions. Law job classes also needed to apply the law in handling cases and enforcing the law. They needed to turn empty laws into actual cases and use their own actions to fulfill their own understanding of the law. Of course, mages could look through other people's experimental records, and judges could look through case collections. However, looking at information and experiencing it personally were two completely different things. In order to reach the peak, one needed to be able to slowly grind away at a rock, and there was no room for falsehood. Back in Sulphur Mountain City, the strongest individuals of the Four Halls were also judges, handling cases every day. Warriors, knight, saint knight, and other melee professions would have it even harder. They would often need to hone their sword techniques and train their bodies. If they didn't touch their sword for 3 days, they would be rusty. If they didn't touch their sword for a week, they would regress. If they didn't touch their sword for half a year, they would be half crippled. If they wanted to improve step by step, those warriors who practiced their sword techniques every day before the sun rose were the best examples. Of course, if one reached Adam and Marguerite's level, combat techniques and spellcasting would become second nature, and there would be no need to hone their skills every day. But perhaps it was because it had become a habit. Adam and the others never neglected their training. Tens of thousands of sword techniques every day would be enough for an ordinary swordsman to train for a month. Only Roland would sleep until noon. Mary woke up very early, but she only stretched her body and did some sword-swinging practice before returning to her room. After all, as a 4-elemental swordcaster, although there was the word sword in their job title, nobody expected them to be skilled in sword techniques. Their numerous and widely used sword seals were the foundation of their strength. 7 years was the fastest period of growth for a new job class that had started from nothing. Back then, Roland saw the potential of this job, but what he threw out was an incomplete job. Now, countless people had perfected this job that did not have high requirements for both magic and martial arts. Starting from the initial 4 elemental sword seals, there were now more than 30 types of regular sword seals. This new job also had its own direction of advancement, and a large number of regular gold rank advanced jobs were produced. For example, there were those who specialized in the extreme advancement of certain elemental sword seals, and in battle, they were similar to spellcasters. There were also those who specialized in the use of sword seals, and in combination with magic sword techniques similar to magic warriors. They were spirit swordsmen. The former mainly focused on the research of higher-level sword seals. They often carried multiple miniature energy pools, and their magic swords would also have a few more insertion slots for Olivia's magic box and sword seal module. The latter, on the other hand, was proficient in the combination of various sword seals. They often carried multiple magic swords for themselves to use various magic sword techniques. Compared to the traditional spellcaster job, although the spirit swordsman only had a single spell and a smaller attack range, the advantages of faster casting and higher frequency were obvious. But what really made it so popular, apart from the lower requirements for spellcasters, was mainly because it was a gold coin job. Yes, this was a gold coin job that burned more money than mages. As long as you had money and had enough Olivia's magic box and sword seal module, you would be the king of war with endless firepower. As for the spirit swordsmen, their path of growth was even more steady and steady. They specialized in the use of various sword seals, as well as the various powerful magic sword techniques that were created by combining sword seals. Perhaps the effects would be slower in the short term, but in the eyes of the truly strong, their evaluation would be much higher than that of the spirit swordsman. And the strongest spirit swordsman, Cohen, was said to have already stepped into the myth rank. He even had the battle record of not being defeated by a semi-god, and was viewed as the most accomplished member of the younger generation on the continent. By the way, when Roland saw this news, he had extremely complex feelings. Apart from "my disciple has finally surpassed me on this path," I'm very gratified. Apart from that, there were even more thoughts like, how did he surpass me so quickly? How am I supposed to put on airs in front of him in the future? Getting back to the main topic, the most obvious advantage of the 4 elemental swordcasters being ahead of the times, and the reason why they were quickly accepted by the various countries and the people of the world, was their excellent compatibility with the magic machinery of the new era. Every swordcaster carried various small tools on them, and as long as they inserted their magic swords into the magic machinery, they would be able to control the machinery as if they were controlling their own arms. This was something that a pilot with natural training would never be able to compare to. Because of this, among the 4 elemental swordcasters, there were also those who used their magic swords as controllers to control all sorts of magic machinery. However, since large-scale battle machinery was expensive and often used for the military of a certain country, there were still very few professional pilots. They would often choose to use specially made magic swords and work for the military. It could be said that the strength of a 4 elemental swordcaster had nothing to do with their physical body, but rather how many sword seals they had mastered, how many magic sword techniques they had learned, whether they had enough sword seal modules in Olivia's magic box, and whether they had brought all sorts of new battle machinery with them. Mary had already stepped into the gold rank, but just by looking at the magic swords with 3 sockets, one could tell that she was a spirit swordsman who mainly used high-level sword seals as her main combat strength. All the equipment on her body was expendable. Under the premise that the enemy's current situation was unknown, actual combat training was actually a kind of meaningless preemptive consumption of combat strength and could easily expose one's trump card. Tiana also woke up very early and started practicing her swordsmanship before the sky had even brightened. As an anti-knight, they had lost almost all of their supernatural abilities. The only thing they could rely on was their firm willpower and the sharp sword in their hands. For an anti-knight, willpower could be turned into protective armor, could be turned into a sharp blade for attack, but it could only turn the opponent into a mortal like themselves. In the end, the victory still depended on the sword techniques in their hands. In a sense, This was a difficult profession that only martial arts experts had the confidence to advance into. Of course, if your martial arts were too lousy, you could put on heavy armor and compete with your opponent in a battle of attrition, but it would be hard to say who would win. Most of your painstaking training would be wasted from the beginning. But obviously, Tiana was the former. She was an expert swordsman and an extremely outstanding would-be sword saint. As she swung her silver-white longsword, pitch-black clouds and mist appeared. The blood patterns on the blade vaguely flowed, and the standard enchanted mithril heavy sword whistled in the wind like a magic sword. This wasn't because they had fallen into darkness, but because the anti-knight carried the special effect of the god's loathing curse. All their weapons and armor would gradually be dyed black, which represented depravity. When Tiana swung her sword, there was still some black mist surrounding the silver armor. But due to the armor's special design, the black mist wrapped around the key parts like floating clouds, making the armor appear faintly discernible, adding a mysterious, elegant, and bizarre sense of beauty. The curse seemed to have become another kind of decoration. I didn't expect it to have such an effect. Is this the reason why they chose this armor? Sure enough, these elves love beauty to the bone. Tiana didn't choose the elves' favorite rapier and scimitar, because those two obviously lacked strength and weren't suitable for the heavily armored knight class. The heavy sword vibrated like rolling thunder, and a faint sword aura enveloped the blade. The black sword aura faintly reverberated on the heavy sword. This was the sign of a would-be sword saint who had mastered aura. When she could release sword aura as she pleased, that would be the day she truly became a sword saint. Seeing the scene, my first reaction was, so that girl isn't as young as I thought. Elves matured extremely slowly. A qualified true warrior would need 200 years. Judging from past experience, a would-be sword saint like her wouldn't be able to advance without several hundred years, unless she was a super genius. And if she was a veteran warrior with several hundred years of experience, then her experience wouldn't be too bad. And perhaps the reason why they dared to accept this mission was because they had such an expert following them. In a sense, the anti-knight and the 4 elemental swordcasters were two extremes. One reached its limit without external help, while the other was completely useless without external help. Over the past few years, through actual combat, these two classes were the best partners on the battlefield. One had many abilities, but they weren't stable. Since low-level sword seals had limited instantaneous explosive power, they were the worst at dealing with powerful individuals. The other didn't fear any duel and specialized in difficult attacks, but lacked support abilities. This formed a natural complement of abilities. But because the number of 4 elemental swordcasters kept increasing, the anti-knight's advancement requirements were too high. Even the lowest rank had to be a gold job, and they had to be skilled in martial arts. This combination had unwittingly become a monopoly of the northern powers. Of course, this also had a lot to do with the strongest anti-knight and the leader of all the anti-knight, Diana. If that Mary is about the same level, then I probably won't have to worry about being killed by those little fellows from the Death Council. At this moment, I was lying under a tree, reading a newspaper while thinking about how to tell them about my latest discovery without leaving a trace. Yep, I definitely wasn't sipping tea while looking at beautiful women. I was doing something serious. That's right, I went to investigate last night and discovered something. Although I wasn't a member of the Death Council, it could be said that I was on their tail. As long as I followed the clues, I might be able to dig out a large group of them. How do I unknowingly let them break the ritual? I can't even expose myself. So it's so difficult to be a good NPC. What a headache. Devils and demons are fighting again. This year's 4th conflict between a devil lord and a demon lord. That's a rare piece of good news. The newspaper headlines were about a new round of fighting in the Chaos Abyss. A certain demon lord was torn to shreds, and a certain devil lord successfully advanced in rank in the midst of battle. Right now, the most chaotic part of all the planes in HE wasn't the mortal plane, but the lower planes. The disappearance of the will of the Chaos Abyss directly caused the entire Chaos Abyss to go completely out of control. The devils and demons, who already had many conflicts with each other, were now fighting each other. As for whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, nobody could say. They're even able to gather information about the lower planes so quickly. It seems that I underestimated the fairies in the past. Perhaps I should consider cooperating with them. It was worth mentioning that as the Holy War progressed, and the fairies paid no heed to the costs, HE's already well-developed newspaper industry became even more prosperous. Using griffins to deliver the latest weekly magazines seemed far too extravagant in the past. Just as the content of the newspaper, which was supposed to be a cover, truly attracted my attention, Diana suddenly walked over and smiled at me. "Caro, have you learned anything after reading for so long? Do you have time to practice swordsmanship with me?" I paused for a moment, and then, judging from my embarrassed and angry expression, it seemed that I had accidentally offended her. But as a wily old fox, how could I possibly admit defeat so easily? "Of course, my lady, as long as you're willing to treat me to a week's worth of ale as payment. However, I've already pawned all my weapons and equipment for ale, so you can help me buy a set of chainmail and a longsword. Right, if you accidentally injure me, can I apply for medical fees and mental compensation?" Chapter 482. Do you have time to practice with me? Don't worry. Normally, I won't hurt you. Even if I accidentally hurt you, I can still afford the medical fees. Yep, if I accidentally hurt you, I'll pay for your living expenses for half a year. Diana looked at me with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. I was surprised at first, but looking at her dark red face and embarrassed expression, I roughly knew what the problem was. Experts were very sensitive to other people's gazes. Right now, wherever she was practicing with her sword, a bearded vagabond would constantly stare at her sensitive parts. That fiery gaze wasn't hidden at all. Her thighs, breasts, and buttocks weren't even left. He was basically a perverted criminal, so naturally she was in a bad mood. This was truly a misunderstanding. In the past, there were quite a few beautiful dark elves in Sulphur Mountain City, and he had gotten used to looking at beautiful women together with Adam. It was probably because he was chatting about important matters while looking at beautiful women. This time, he had gotten too used to it. Just because I was fine before didn't mean I was fine now. In the past, I was either wearing a semi-god mask that blocked off all senses or a skeleton, which obviously wouldn't attract the attention of the victim. But this time, I was less than 10 meters away, and my gaze was still on the important parts of the opposite party. Obviously, I was courting death. The thief Mark and the barbarian Mond gave me a thumbs up, meaning something along the lines of amazing. Everyone knows that this girl isn't to be trifled with and secretly stared at her, but you didn't even try to hide it. You're a real man. All right, I wasn't guessing. The barbarian actually shouted it out, but Diana glared at him and he obediently lowered his head. Don't worry, it's just practice. I'll use the back of my blade. After thinking for a while, I looked at the displeased Diana, slowly unsheathing her sword. She seemed to want to teach me a lesson no matter what I said. I felt a bit helpless and could only find an excuse. Actually, I just missed this sword technique. This is Sulphur Mountain City's third military sword technique. I learned it for a period of time in the past. You learned it quite well and have already broken away from the norm. But copying others too much will instead restrict your own path, which isn't necessarily a good thing. You really know how to brag. The old gambler knows sword techniques. I've never seen him use a sword. I did see him swing the wooden sword a few times, but it was like a stick. TSK, TSK, TSK. You must be spouting nonsense to pick up girls. Everyone looked at me in disbelief after I said that, but Tiana was stunned. She never expected to hear such words here. The person she respected the most had said the same thing to her before. Imitation is a necessary part of every swordsman, but everyone has their own path. Tiana, your talent in swordsmanship is actually above mine, but you're not me. My path doesn't suit you. I hope you can think more and walk your own path. Diana's face was filled with astonishment, but I simply stroked my chin and maintained a mysterious smile. Thinking back to the full beard on my face, I felt like I was trying to fool the blind with my coquettish eyes. Of course, I knew that she was using the third military sword technique. After all, Sulphur Mountain City's military training manual was written by us. Since Sulphur Mountain City's warriors needed to learn sword techniques, It was impossible for Adam and I, the two top sword saints of the continent, not to learn them. The knight's heavy sword and the one-handed sword seemed similar, but there was actually a huge difference. The third military sword technique was the knight heavy armor sword technique that I personally wrote. Since it was a common sword technique, I naturally wouldn't add in too many difficult techniques. Since it was a military sword technique, I naturally wouldn't be lenient. It was ruthless, accurate, and heavy. One strike for one life, and easily for serious injuries. Although it was a royal sword technique, it was like a mad bull when used, so it was also called the wild bull sword technique. And saying that Tiana was imitating others wasn't just empty words. It was originally a head-on third sword technique, and it wasn't very popular among the town security. After all, dark elves weren't known for their strength. But there was a stupid girl who trained hard in this sword technique, and in the end, she even surpassed her teacher, completing a new version of the wild bull sword technique. She added shoulder strikes, elbow strikes, kicks, and other small movements into the sword technique, evolving the wild bull sword technique from a fierce charge into the wild bull sword technique that used the entire body to fight. But this sword technique was only suitable for her, who was born with extremely high stats. If others were to learn this modified version of the wild bull sword technique, its power would decrease. But on the other hand, those small physical movements that didn't have much killing power were very suitable for street brawls and dealing with drunkards. And on the battlefield, it was also very suitable for her indomitable fighting style. Now that I think about it, this Tiana, even her makeup and hairstyle are imitating that silly girl. Even that silly girl has a loyal admirer. How complicated. All right, now that I mentioned it, probably everyone knew that the silly girl was Diana. Thinking about how that stupid subordinate of theirs had suddenly become a legendary hero, everyone's feelings were a bit complicated. I rubbed my chin, inexplicably deep in thought. But the silly cat jumped onto my shoulder. Do you feel like you're outdated? No. Since it's such a high imitation, the armor should be the same. I'm imagining what that silly girl would look like after wearing this armor. It should be very pleasing to the eye, but I keep feeling like something's missing. I suddenly have a new inspiration. How about I find a place and mail the new design to Adam? I suddenly feel like it's not wrong for her to want to get even with you. Also, can't you restrain yourself a bit? The silly cat's complaints came out of nowhere, and I could only helplessly smile wryly. I didn't want to either. Who knew that the 7 original sins would be like this after returning? It's probably a good thing that my soul is complete, but I didn't need to say anything else. Everyone knew what was going on. After the Hades was built, due to certain reasons, the emotions that the 7 original sins represented returned to my soul after the 7 infernos were completely rebuilt. It was just like how someone who had been restraining themselves for too long would likely be unable to control themselves if they were suddenly released. I was actually not used to having my soul complete. The lack of emotions from the 7 original sins had accompanied me for countless years. Now that they had all returned, it was indeed a bit unbearable. A life without desires would make one like a walking corpse, but when one had too many thoughts, it would be difficult to control. This sudden idea that popped out was probably just a small inconvenience. Of course, I was confident that I could control it well. Having my emotions and soul complete would also allow me to improve further. However, I was afraid that it would take some time to completely deal with my violent emotions. My previous words were obviously a mistake due to this. If this was in the past, since I didn't want to expose myself, I would have shamelessly talked nonsense with her, turning this duel into a farce. Pure rationality didn't require too much emotional interference. But now, pointing out the shortcomings of a sword saint from such a high position would naturally attract a great deal of attention from her. It would seem that I still had some useless pride. Asterisk Shing. Asterisk as expected. Diana still unsheathed her sword. But this time, her expression was serious. Someone who could point out the pros and cons of her swordsmanship after watching her practice for only a few dozen minutes was most likely much stronger than her. Please enlighten me. Sword saint. This time, after taking a deep breath, Diana held her sword with both hands and looked to her opponent at eye level. She came with the mentality of asking for guidance from an expert. Relaxing her hands, she raised her sword over her shoulder and swung it horizontally to the right. This was the starting stance of the Raging Bull swordsmanship's 3 killing moves. It seemed that as soon as she started, she would give it her all. At this point, the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring and had to be released. Even the others were watching. I shook my head but still got up. It seemed that I couldn't avoid it. Just play around. Don't be too serious. I'm very weak right now. Ouch, ouch, ouch. What are you doing, Catalina? I had just picked up a wooden stick and was planning to practice with the little girl when my ear started to hurt. Apologies, guest. Please don't bother with this bastard. This guy just likes to brag and be stubborn. He's always trying to scare people. Actually, he doesn't have any skills. He's already been taught a lesson by many adventurers. Her aqua blue hair was tied with a pink ribbon. Under her willow leaf-like eyebrows were phoenix eyes that were always full of energy. Her simple barmaid uniform had the golden embroidery of a noble maid's uniform. Her red apple-like face had a few imperfect pimples. When she spoke, she even danced with her hands and feet. Her entire person gave off the feeling that she was full of energy. But at this moment, this stupid girl number 2 was actually twisting my ear. Ouch, ouch, damn girl. What are you doing? I'm saving you. Idiot. Hurry up and apologize to this great adventurer. Did you forget how you were thrown out by that dwarf craftsman last month? Huh. I was really able to fix that iron motorcycle back then. How could I have known that those bastard gnomes were such scammers? The moment I opened the lid, they self-destructed. Also, that great mage found that wand in the ruins. You actually said that you could identify it. What was the result? If you can't identify it, then you're just spouting nonsense. I didn't lie. That was a pink spell, summoning tentacle surgery. That mage was too embarrassed to admit the truth. Catalina, do you believe me or that mage? Of course it's the great mage. I've already been tricked by you enough. What legendary ice mage, the strongest sword saint in the continent. You've caused me to be laughed at so many times. I'd be really stupid to believe you again. But such words were unable to move the furious barkeeper's daughter. She suddenly pressed my head down and bowed to Diana in apology. I'm sorry, great adventurer. Although this bastard is full of nonsense, and although he's a lazy, drunkard, and gambler, he's still a good person. As an apology, I'll waive your accommodation fees for the next few days. But when she turned her head, she had an expression like that of a devil. The reduced income will all be put on your debt. Stinky drunkard, go wash the dishes for me. Don't even think about being lazy. Then she bowed again, turned around, grabbed me by the collar, and directly dragged me away. Hey, I'm really good fighting. I'm a sword saint. You can't treat an epic hero like this. I'm really a big shot, a really big shot. But unfortunately, no one believed the truth. It seemed that Catalina, who was born with divine strength, was worried that such nonsense would anger the great adventurer. She ran even faster. Haha, as expected of a classic scene. I won't get tired of watching it. Catalina, do your best. Let him wash the boss's stinky socks. Caro, if you're an epic hero, then I'm a demigod-level lich. My feet, which were dragged by a monstrous force, left a groove on the ground. But the empty ground was already filled with laughter. Did I really make a mistake? Shaking her head helplessly, Diana sheathed her sword. She kept feeling that something was wrong. Mudon, I really am a legendary hero. You brat, sure Dan, you actually dare to laugh at me. Fine, when I recover my strength, I'll really turn you into a lich. Haha, I'll be waiting for you. I'm so scared. Great Sword Saint Caro. Ugh, no, your highness great lich. Then, the entire training ground roared with laughter again. It seemed that the air of happiness was everywhere. As for me, who was being dragged, I could only shake my head helplessly. Why was it that every time I told the truth, no one believed me? But when I tried to bluff people with half-truths, everyone fell for it. But feeling the increasingly frightening brute force behind me, I began to hesitate. In a way, this mixed-blood girl was a major factor in my staying in this tavern for more than half a year. This brute force has increased by 20% compared to last month. According to the system's standard calculations, my strength has already broken through 30. How terrifying. This can't continue. Perhaps I'll have to have a showdown with old Barton. Chapter 483. Nobody would have expected that a gambling addict and lazy drunkard who spouted nonsense would actually be that invaluable epic hero. After all, in the eyes of most people, the strong could be arrogant, sly, and untrustworthy, but they would never be so shameless as to not care about their reputation. When an ordinary man gets angry, blood splatters 5 steps away. When a feudal lord gets angry, blood flows. When the emperor gets angry, millions of corpses fall. Isn't that the point of being in this world? I'll take the life of anyone who dares to embarrass me. And it just so happened that there really was such a shameless, epic hero in this world. Reputation? Can I eat it? Yep, it's definitely to hide my identity and not just for fun. All right then, I admit that sometimes it was quite amusing to tell the truth, but others didn't believe me no matter what. But in another aspect, I wasn't lying. I was indeed incredibly weak right now. Roll and missed. Strength, 24, agility, 24, constitution, 25, intelligence, 32, will, 22, charm, 20. Bloodline, arbiter, natural talent abilities, war angel form, original sin demon form, titan blood, gaze of the hell god. Basic job class, level 60 order knight / level 60 chaos, witch king / level 10, 4 elemental swordcasters. Advanced job class, level 6 master of winter. Overall level, impossible to evaluate. Magical pet, Harlois. Mount / armor, Irene Bela. These are my stats before the Battle of the Hades, but now, Roland missed. Strength, 4, agility, 7, constitution, 5, intelligence, 32, will, 22, charm, 22, secret. Bloodline, hybrid of an arbiter and a wood spirit. This is what it means to be powerless. How could I have known that she would be so petty? She actually cast a weakening curse on me. I think that you deserve it. Agreed. By the way, if it was me, I would have been even more vicious. I was now regretting bringing the silly cat and Astria with me. Ever since Astria stopped using her disguise system, all sorts of ridiculous jokes and double insults made me feel helpless. However, the system that she provided was indeed quite convenient. After talking to her, she also gave me some detailed information on how to determine my stats in order to make it easier to cultivate. Attributes didn't increase in a linear fashion. Instead, they increased by analogy. The higher the attributes, the lower the number of existences that could achieve them. Strength, muscle strength, and sturdiness 4 strength. The lower limit for a human is 3, which is equivalent to a vegetable. So if your strength is only 4, it is a compliment when people say that you are weak. Normally, a goose is 6, so you have the strength of half a goose. Agility includes your body's flexibility, hand and eye coordination, reflexes, body coordination, and other comprehensive attributes. It also includes your control over your body and reflexes. 7 agility. Amelia is quite kind. She only occasionally falls on flat ground at this stage, so it's still quite cute. It's about a dozen times a day. If it was 2 points lower, you would really have to worry about inexplicably dying from choking on water or slipping down a cliff. Physique, physical health, resistance to disasters and diseases. 5 points in physique, Little Sister Peach. Little Sister Lindayu, how are you? Don't cry anymore. You might really cry yourself to death. Last time, you cried until you fainted, and it took me a lot of effort to save you. Note, since your basic attributes are only forcefully sealed by the weakness curse, your real attributes are still there. Your physique will still be above the healthy standard. You don't need to worry about getting drunk or overeating when you drink or eat, but the hangover the next day will definitely not make you feel good. Be obedient and stop drinking. Basic attributes were the foundation of the physical body. The other 3 attributes were related to the soul. Leaving aside the fact that I was still a spellcaster with my original 3 measurements, just the fact that I was so weak in close combat was already enough to determine me as a useless piece of trash. As for why it was like this and why those 2 fellows said that I deserved it, I would have to start with the backup plan that I left behind back then. The gods of the Hades were a part of the natural laws of the Hades. It was impossible for their true bodies to leave. This was a requirement of the natural laws, and from a certain standpoint, it was also a method to keep them in check. This restriction was far stricter than the gods of He, but it was in order to prevent the gods from interfering too much in the mortal world. Since the Hades themselves represented justice, the four pillar gods, who were the rulers of the Hades, were even more unable to violate the most basic natural laws. They would never be able to leave the Hades. Otherwise, the so-called justice and fairness would become nothing more than a joke. Logically speaking, as the pillar of law, Womian's Roland should also forever remain in the Hades. This iron rule was actually the only backdoor I left behind. No, actually, it couldn't really be called a backdoor. It was just that my ability was far too special, and I just happened to be able to follow the requirements of the natural laws and reincarnate. Yep, the loophole that I took advantage of was Womian's Roland. I became the pillar of law in the form of Womian's and Roland's god descent. After the god's descent ended, Womian's would still be the pillar of law, forever the god of justice. Losing his sense of self actually made him even more fitting for justice. As for Roland, he was just an ordinary dead person in the Hades. The rest was quite easy to understand. In this life, I only lived for a few years. I didn't violate many god laws. In fact, I didn't even commit many crimes that were worthy of punishment. In less than a year, I completed the punishment of hell and naturally returned to the cycle of reincarnation. This wasn't the first time I had returned to the cycle of reincarnation. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary soul would have all their memories and sense of self destroyed, and they would have to start all over again. However, since I was able to maintain my sense of self in the cycle of reincarnation, I wouldn't want to have another parent or have a terrifyingly long childhood. Every time I returned to the cycle of reincarnation, I would have to crawl out of the river Styx and then find a system with the power of creation to ask for a chance to start all over again. This time, if I had to start all over again, it would obviously be too much of a waste of time. And so, I thought of other existences with the power of creation. Perhaps they would have a solution. That's right, other creator gods. In this world, the goddess of creation wasn't the only creator god. Unlike thousands of years ago, due to some unpredictable changes, there were now two other existences with the power of creator god that I could choose from. Needless to say, one of them was the Hades. As one of the former rulers of the Hades, I was completely familiar with this path. Even the gods of the Hades would give me the green light. However, if I chose the Hades, I would be unable to leave the Hades since the ghosts and other species within the Hades were also unable to leave. Unless I joined the underworld envoys Helldragon species, it would be impossible for me to leave the Hades. However, I didn't want to be reincarnated as a giant lizard at all. Dragons and humans were foundationally different, and I would need to spend an immeasurable amount of time familiarizing myself with my physical body. Since I couldn't choose the Hades, there was only one option left, which was even more straightforward: the wood spirits of the Forest of Dreams. Within the Forest of Dreams, the wood spirits were capable of directly converting adventurers into wood spirits without having to start all over again. This was one of the wood spirits' most popular services for a fee. They were also capable of directly converting the souls of the dead within the Forest of Dreams into new wood spirits. This was obviously a type of reincarnation that belonged only to the wood spirits. As I previously mentioned, Amelia had somehow managed to obtain the authority of the creator goddesses within the Forest of Dreams. The most obvious evidence was that the wood spirits had a completely independent soul reincarnation cycle, independent from all other worlds. This was obviously a special privilege that only belonged to the creator goddesses. Although this authority was obviously limited, as a natural species, the wood spirits were likely the strongest in terms of creating new physical bodies. This was also something that I lacked the most. And so, when the time came for my grand plan to be carried out, I personally went to the Forest of Dreams in the Bardi Empire and gave them a blood coffin. This is a sample of my flesh and blood. Is that enough? Relax, Father. will create a new physical body for you. When your soul is destroyed, you'll be able to revive through this new physical body. It's the same principle as a lich's phylactery. But how will you guarantee that your soul will return to your physical body? Will you need some sort of soul-summoning ritual? Haha, I naturally have a plan. Father, if you sacrifice so much flesh and blood at once, your body will become weak and your combat strength will greatly decrease. What will you do about yourself? Haha, I naturally have a plan. Back then, in order to keep this a secret, I didn't even tell the truth about the wood spirits. I only told them that it was a backup physical body. Actually, just as I expected, I didn't need to personally go into battle. And after the Hades were successfully created, the world developed as I expected. The entire wood spirits spared no expense in investing in me, and the backup physical body that I created with my own flesh and blood did indeed retain most of my abilities. But man proposes, God disposes. In the end, I still fell short by just a little bit. And then you ran headfirst into her? How would I have known that Amelia would awaken so coincidentally? How would I have known that she would? Forced marriage. Actually, little Amelia is quite an excellent choice. In fact, from a female's point of view, you're the worst. Cursing you is already letting you off easy. That's right. First, you promise to marry a woman, get the dowry, and then immediately run away from the marriage. Isn't this the type of relationship fraud and marriage fraud that women hate the most? You're such a scumbag that Amelia only cursed you. That's quite cute. Cute? Are you sure that the woman who was entangled by countless snake vines and intended to devour me for revenge was cute? Are you sure that the demonic who caused a mega earthquake that swept through 3 counties was only to prevent me from escaping was cute? Do you think that the crazy woman who formed a frightening face in the clouds and shouted, "Roland, you're dead meat," was cute? It's all your fault. You're wrong. I wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Did I mysteriously become the public enemy #1 for all women? Weren't you the ones who tried to persuade me to run away? Weren't all of you the ones who said things like, "How can a marriage without feelings be happy?" And she must have slept herself into a daze. You need to think about the consequences. What do you think Eliza will do if she finds out? How did it become all my fault in the blink of an eye? Couldn't you be a little more reasonable? No, it's all your fault. Isn't there a saying on Earth? A woman's privilege is to be unreasonable. All right then, it would seem that it was impossible to be reasonable with women in certain situations. But no matter what, I had suffered the consequences of my own actions. This physical body was Amelia's handiwork, so it was only natural that she had left her mark on it. It was far too easy for the creator goddess to fix her own creations. This curse of weakness that made it impossible for me to take care of myself was her ace in the hole to force me to obediently return. It should be mentioned that the silly cat, my soul-bound magical pet, was cruelly beaten back to her original form after showing off for a while. The inferno that she guarded could only be guarded by a special clone of hers. Although Harlow's abilities were rather unique, she was probably the only one who had a clone that was far stronger than the main body. But from a different standpoint, this curse of weakness wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps I'll become even stronger because of this. At the very least, I'll be stronger than that muscular idiot. I slowly sliced down with my knife, slicing off pieces of beef. It seemed simple, but if one looked closely, they would discover that each piece of beef was as thin as paper. Not only that, the thickness and shape of each piece of beef were identical. It would have been understandable if it was a good sword, but the kitchen knife I was currently using was a blunt knife that wouldn't even bleed when I cut someone. Eyesight, hand strength, and mental strength. My heavy body was a natural shackle for me. My lack of strength meant that I had to use all of my body's strength for every attack. My heart and body were in perfect harmony as I cultivated. Perhaps if I truly wanted to cultivate, I could cultivate anywhere in my life. I tossed a fruit into the air, and my knife flashed. What fell into my bowl was an exquisite jigsaw puzzle of fruit slices. When I scooped it up, there was even an extra rabbit sculpture. At the very least, my control over my power has improved significantly, and I've also gained new understandings. In that case, Let me start over from the smallest detail and see if I can surpass that idiot. Now that the Hades have been successfully created, most of my responsibilities have been lifted. If I still had any worries, it would be my promise from back then to properly teach that idiot who had fallen into the abyss a lesson. Right now, we're far too far apart. Back then, we were about the same level of power. Now that more than 300 years had passed, it would be impossible for us to compare in terms of individual combat strength. If it wasn't for the fact that I cheated, he probably would have killed me with a single blow of his sword. Judging from how he was delighted to see Cynthia's true form and how he left, he would definitely become even stronger the next time we met. Theoretically speaking, our natural talents should be about the same level. In terms of effort, neither of us should have had any time to slack off. Yet, there was such an obvious difference between the two of us who were about the same speed. It wasn't difficult to come to a conclusion if one really looked into it. In the past 300 years, there were far too many things that distracted me. I spent a lot of effort thinking, planning, and strategizing. In the end, I obtained what I wanted. A mature team was gradually changing the world for the better, and the end of the world seemed to have been averted. As the Abyss Prince, Carwin's daily life consisted of killing, and eating. He also obtained what he wanted the most. He became the strongest existence in the world, and even killed his own enemy. It was difficult to say whose choice was correct, because everyone's choices in life were all the same. However, I was quite displeased that I easily lost to that idiot in a one-on-one duel. Now that I no longer had any pressure, I was quite interested to know if I would be able to fight against Carwin's in the end, if I put all my effort into my own cultivation. Caro, is the roast beef and fruit salad not ready yet? Almost. I heard Catalina's urgent voice from outside the kitchen. Only now did I realize that I had accidentally sliced the beef too thinly and hadn't roasted it properly. The fruit puzzles and sculptures were also impossible to make into salad. I would have to start all over again. It would seem that I should first deal with the important matters at hand before thinking about cultivation. Chapter 484. Please move aside. We need to investigate a case. Investigate a case? Who gave you such authority? This is the solid dukedom's Anton town, the territory of the god of justice and commandment. We don't welcome outsiders like you. At the first glimmer of dawn, I was woken up by a commotion at the entrance. Looking out the window, it was a dispute between adventurers. A group of people was blocking the entrance to prevent another group from coming out. It was a common case of people blocking the entrance. The ones who were blocking the way were quite familiar. They were the 3 newcomers from the cult investigation team. Considering that they weren't weak, those who could cause trouble for them naturally wouldn't be weaklings. They were obviously a group of clergymen, and they were members of the church who were doing quite well. Their white priest robes were embroidered with purple and gold lines. It was obvious that their rank wasn't low. Although the holy emblem of a cross and a silver holy sword was tacky, the faint holy power flowing on it was proof that they were priests of a true god. Behind them, there were more than 10 holy knight and warriors in silver armor and swords. It seemed that the bishop of Naples had brought a knight of the temple to get back at them. The god of justice and commandment, Napuz, was a lesser divine power. His priesthood was not the justice that he proclaimed. After all, the concept of justice was too empty and vast. Even a main god would not be able to handle it. His true priesthood was only the derivative concepts of commandment, such as discipline, self-discipline, separation of classes, military rules, and so on. Many soldiers and lords were his believers. Is it another conflict of faith? Over the years, such things had happened many times. The believers of the various gods of order usually wouldn't fight with each other on the surface, but there were plenty of open and secret fights in private. As for getting along well with the various gods of Hades who fought for faith and influence, that was already an impossible task. The solid dukedom was a small country. It wasn't even as rich as a county of a large country. It didn't have any powerful characters. Anton town was a remote town. Adding the 3 surrounding towns, the population didn't exceed 100,000. Napus was a weak god, so the number of priests and combat power were limited. The combination of all these factors meant that the church would only preach in densely populated areas. The small towns at the border of the Sala dukedom didn't have much influence from the Napist church. Looking at the boots and cloaks of the priest and the knight, who were covered in dust, it seemed that they had received a notice and were temporarily transferred from the bishop's district in the capital. Faith is the source of a true God's power. Believers are the true God's earthly walkers, and the parish is the true God's earthly palace. We can completely understand a true God's concern for his small territory. But obviously, this will not hinder our decision. Back in the day, the God of Law and the God of Holy Light had signed an alliance treaty in the Northlands that allowed the two major factions to maintain the most basic level of peace and trust. At the very least, before the Chaos Abyss's invasion and the Holy War ended, before both sides' common enemies were vanquished, this fragile alliance would always exist. Hadn't they already fallen out with each other? They had already made a move in the Hades, so why did their alliance still exist? It was precisely because they had fallen out with each other that the originally meaningless alliance became important. In reality, most of the diplomatic alliances between countries were like this. If both sides had the need to maintain peace on the surface and had common interests, then even an outdated agreement that was originally just a piece of scrap paper could find some relationship. A mere verbal alliance could become an ironclad agreement. And if both sides felt that there was no need for the alliance to exist, then even if they were allies recognized by the world, they would immediately fall out with each other in the next moment and fight to the death. And at this time, since Napus saw him as having been offended, he naturally sent out his loyal servants. But it wasn't to help his believers who were in danger, but to chase away the uninvited guests. And at the entrance of the Rhino Tavern, the Bishop of Napus repeatedly emphasized that the other party had crossed the line. They couldn't interfere with the matters here, as this was their territory. And faced with such questioning, Tiana and the others had long since gotten used to it. We allow the rules of the law and the scales of justice to guide us. We come for the fairness and justice in our hearts. We come for the ordinary people who ask us for help. You, for your great true God. Then why didn't I see any of you when the blood sacrifice first happened? The Dark Elves' mouths had always been very poisonous. Even if the law of night restricted lies and deliberately hurtful words, this statement of the pure truth was even more hurtful. The God of justice? Didn't you see what your God did for you? Seeing the other party's guilty conscience, Mary, the mercenary, pressed on. Mercenaries who didn't know how to bicker would probably die from anger sooner or later. Her questioning was also very difficult to answer. Only the rookie in the team, Saul, had a face full of panic. Evil blasphemers, how can you be fit to be the servants of God, you dark-skinned? This was what the bishop kept muttering. In his mind, the evil dark elves should have been burned to death, and the God of law, who was in cahoots with them, was also an evil god. No, it should be said that in the eyes of the fanatics, as long as they didn't worship their God, it was already a capital crime. In the eyes of the three members of the law faction, these newcomers were basically unreasonable, and the priests of the fanatics were the lackeys of the ordered true God. From the old bishop's point of view, the other party's contempt for the gods was an intolerable bully and a heinous crime. If it wasn't for the god's strict orders to avoid conflict, they would have already started fighting. If it was anyone else, they would probably think that this was the inevitable prelude to a god's war, a clash of beliefs. But for me, I saw a fundamental difference, a difference in the nature of belief and theology. The four pillars of light included the pillar of law and the pillar of holy light. They would also take on the role of a divine power server. The Southern sect and the Church of Law were both born because of me. The fundamental difference between them and the traditional God churches was that they didn't leave a place for the gods in their teachings. They believed in and recognized the holy light and the law themselves, not a specific God. Perhaps there didn't seem to be any difference, but there was a huge fundamental difference. This was related to the relationship between mortals and gods, as well as the future of the entire world. The priests of the various gods' churches would respect each other because they were the most loyal servants of the gods, the representatives of the gods' will, and the shepherds of the gods' flocks. The identity of a shepherd was the root of their pride, and they had long since subconsciously drawn a line between themselves and mortals. However, the teachings of the two new major churches told the world that the world belonged to mortals, and that spreading belief was to guide people to do good and make the world a better place, not to serve the gods. The gods who stood high above were only officials with some special privileges, existences that could be replaced or even erased. If this wasn't blasphemy against the gods, then what was? Not to mention, the anti-knight, who was viewed by all the gods as their natural enemy, actually joined forces with the two major churches, which made the order gods even more displeased. From a certain standpoint, the Church of Law and the southern sect used the name of religion, but they were actually digging up the graves of the gods. For some reason, I suddenly thought of the term generation gap as I watched from the sidelines. If I looked at it from a different angle, the era caused the old and new generations to have different values and views on life, which was far too similar to the different understandings of belief and religion that I was seeing now. The rise of a new power would naturally result in conflict with the old power. Not to mention, the law job classes, the 4 elemental swordcasters, and other new generation job classes were rapidly spreading throughout the world. It was inevitable that there would be friction in terms of values, life pursuits, beliefs, and many other aspects. This scene was probably playing out in every corner of the world. But due to the existence of common interests and common enemies, under the pressure of the higher-ups, the grassroots had to maintain self-control. At the very least, they couldn't bear the sin of actively intensifying the conflict. And so, an extremely helpless scene appeared before me. The local bishop brought the knights of the Holy Temple from thousands of miles away to block their opponents. But they could only, "You're a bastard. Your entire family is a bad guy. You're the one whose entire family is a bastard. My father is amazing. Bastard, do you dare to come out? Bastard, do you dare to come in? I'm coming in if you want to hit me. Huh. If you have the guts, then make the first move." Since they couldn't fight, they could only use words. Clergy members didn't know how to scold people. Tossing away those impulsive religious words and allusions and turning it into plain language, what was left was probably the content of a primary school student quarrel. And since it was already confirmed that they couldn't fight from the very start, they didn't even have the ability to fight like primary school students. Since they couldn't gang up on him, some people thought of another method. I, Holy Knight White Behemoth, challenge you. With my lifetime of glory as a knight, let's have a fair duel. The middle-aged knight who was leading the group stepped forward. Judging from his epaulets and his aura, he should be a legend rank knight. It seemed that he saw that the strongest of the other party was a gold rank, so he intended to use his personal strength to suppress the other party. However, the others looked at him with worry in their eyes. Obviously, the situation wasn't optimistic. Due to the surge of the elemental tide after the Dawn era, it became much easier to advance than before. Gold rank masters became very common, and even legend rank masters became more and more common. In the past, the most difficult part of becoming a legend rank master was probably the step of condensing a soul imprint. That was a summary of the past, as well as a clear path for the future. It wasn't that easy to recognize oneself, and in the current environment, it was possible to advance successfully without a soul imprint. However, their strength couldn't be compared to a true legend rank master of the previous era. This kind of fake legend rank master wasn't even fundamentally different from a gold rank master. However, there was always a way. As they consolidated their realm, they could also condense a soul imprint. However, they were also destined to be unable to recognize themselves. This kind of soul imprint couldn't be compared to a true legend rank master. It was usually a common item that slightly increased a certain ability, but the quantitative change couldn't achieve a qualitative change. Such legend rank masters were also called pseudo-legend rank masters. Now, the Knight Captain White, who had taken the initiative to issue a challenge, was a pseudo-legend rank master who had just advanced not long ago. Perhaps he would be able to condense a common soul imprint after some time, but the current him wasn't fundamentally different from a gold rank master. It was no wonder that his companions were somewhat worried. If you lose, please withdraw from this mission and give us the latest clues you've obtained. We'll take care of the matters of the dukedom." When a dispute arose between the knight, who viewed honor as their life, using a duel to resolve the dispute was a very common choice, and this was also the best method that White could think of at the moment. "We refuse. We have to carry out the mission." None of us. Saul had only spoken halfway when he was directly pulled back by a slender hand. Diana took a step forward, and with a flick of her wrist, the silver-heavy sword brought forth a series of sword flowers. A knight is never afraid of a duel. "Please." Looking at me from upstairs, I shook my head helplessly. How could this girl even learn something like this? Silly girl. Why would a dark elf learn the spirit of a knight? But as a challenger, and a challenger who bullies the weak, you actually think that you still have honor to speak of? Fine, as the prize for accepting the challenge. If you lose, you'll have to leave behind the sword in your hand. Fine, I take back what I just said. Diana was much more cunning than Diana. The heavy sword in her hand was only a standard weapon, and its evaluation was excellent at best. The two-handed sword in the hands of the knight opposite her was glowing. It was obviously an extremely outstanding magical weapon, at least of excellent quality. It might even be of epic quality. It was definitely worth the gamble. And the most cunning thing about her was that she only said what would happen if the opponent lost. She didn't say that she would have to pay with her life if she lost. Even if she really lost, there was still room for negotiation. But the old-fashioned Holy Knight looked like this. Bullying the weak was beyond the limits of his shamelessness. Diana's not-so-harsh words had already made his face flush red. If this duel didn't concern the reputation of the church and was of great importance, he would have had the urge to turn around and run. Now that he heard his opponent propose such a seemingly unfair wager, not only did he hurriedly nod in agreement, he even showed a grateful expression towards the female elf. He thought that she was taking care of his knight's honor. His panic-stricken teammates clearly saw something, but seeing that their captain had already agreed, they couldn't say anything else. They could only cheer for their captain. On the other side, the trio lived up to their reputation of being from Sulphur Mountain City. They were much simpler and more practical. Mary directly threw her small bag filled with all kinds of small tools to Diana. Those were the personal tools of a four-elemental swordcaster who relied on external items. And Saul handed Diana a pouch of ammunition that he kept close to his body. The various wooden handles of the grenades that were exposed from the pouch would make one's scalp go numb. Goblins didn't care what their main job was. If they decided that they had a part-time job, they would either be a merchant or a goblin engineer. And those bastards in the bar had already entered into the mode of watching a show. They couldn't stop pointing and gossiping. But at this moment, I suddenly thought of something. I hurriedly got up and hurriedly went downstairs. Wait a minute. Don't fight yet. Show mercy. Then, when I suddenly rushed into the middle of the two opposing sides, everyone looked at me in astonishment. But they really did stop, as if waiting for me to say something. What clues did you find? Seeing the guide suddenly run down, the quick-witted Mary seemed to have guessed something. Her words immediately caused an uproar, but I did my best to calm my breathing. After a while, I raised my head and swept my gaze across every nervous face with a solemn expression. Using my thickest and most high-pitched voice, I said, "The gold-ranked female elf is 1-to-1. 5. The legend-ranked holy knight is 2-to-1. A draw is 1-to-3. There's no upper limit. You have to be quick." Chapter 485. Don't miss out on this. A legend holy knight versus a dark elf anti-knight. The odds are 1-1. 5 for the gold-ranked female elf, 2. 1 for the legend holy knight, 1. 3 for a draw. This is a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity. You have to place your bets quickly. I casually took out a blank account book from the counter and quickly made a betting list. Then I wave it around. Right? Do you guys want to participate? I, Carlo, am a veteran. I guarantee that I won't cheat anyone. Duelist companions would usually bet on their teammates. However, when I tried to sell the betting list to the clergyman, I noticed that the scene had strangely quietened down. Aren't duels in bars very common? I was a little surprised. However, following everyone's gaze, I saw the furious Holy Knight. Some of them had furious looks on their faces, and some were even unsheathing their swords. I immediately came to a realization. All right, although duels in bars were common, epic and gold-rank duels weren't common in the countryside's Rhino Bar. It didn't matter if the newbies fought or the veterans joined in the fun, but a duel between high and mighty big shots was a little presumptuous. From a certain standpoint, these knight and clergymen were considered nobles. They were completely different from commoner mercenaries. That give you 450? Don't be angry. All right, I'm serious. I'm just joking. Looks like it would be difficult to do business here. I shook my head and shrugged my shoulders. Then, I ran back to the adventurers who were still eating their breakfast. But this time, my gambling coupons were selling like hotcakes. 2 copies of the coupons were quickly sold out. Not surprisingly, most of the people were still optimistic about the epic Holy Knight. After all, the difference in power between the two was very obvious. Also, the Holy Knight's weapon was obviously not an ordinary weapon. When the difference in power was not that big, it would be an important chip that could decide the final result. With these 2 factors added together, it was natural that most people were optimistic about Head Commander White, who had come prepared. Looks like if the Holy Knight wins, I'll go bankrupt this time. If I knew, I wouldn't have started the bet. At this moment, my face was filled with bitterness. It seemed that I was worried that I would lose too badly this time. Don't think about regretting it. You cheater, you went bankrupt long ago. Carlo, don't even think about reneging on your debt this time. We'll be watching you. Come, bet 100 gold on the Holy Knight. Huh, Carlo, boy, I'll be waiting for you to cry. I'll bet on the female elf. Has Carlo ever lost a bet? Of course, there were also some very cunning people, but this did not affect the overall situation. For the sake of gold coins, most people still chose the stronger side, even if the profit they could get would be much smaller. His identity as a clergyman determined that this was not a scam prepared in advance. Soon, the total bet quickly exceeded 2,000. Hurry up and fight. Waiting for you guys to see what I'm doing. Dog fighting? If you're a wimp, go back and hug your mommy to drink milk. The boorish mercenaries didn't care about the big shots from the capital. When these mercenaries waved their betting slips and started to clamor, it was time for the familiar dogfight. If it was an ordinary myth rank expert, there wouldn't be any need for a duel under normal circumstances. They would first take care of these bastards and teach them a lesson about the dignity of a myth rank expert. However, the current knight Captain White no longer had any room to retreat. He kept his eyes on his opponent without any hesitation or wavering. He represented the dignity of the church. Challenging them in his own name was a decision he made from the very beginning. Even for him, taking the initiative to challenge a low-level knight was a form of humiliation in itself. Those who bet on us just treat it as around 2,500 gold coins. The others didn't react, but Goblin Thor tossed out a silver coin. It drew a silver arc in the sky above the bar and landed on my hand. I touched it, and it was actually the ancient Great Demon's voodoo mithril coin. Following the return of the Great Demons, many of these ancient currencies, which were both antiques and precious metals, appeared on the market, and their prices weren't low. These voodoo mithril coins were even more special. Many mages collected them in order to research the possible witchcraft hidden in them. The market price kept rising, and recently, it was about the same amount as what Thor had reported. However, if it was thrown into the mage country, the price would probably double. As expected, the goblins won't miss any chance to make money. As I put away the mithril coin, I revealed a delighted expression on my face. However, I was cursing in my heart. Wasn't this guy intentionally trying to scam me? If a side won, wouldn't I be making a huge loss? However, I had no choice but to accept the bet. After all, on the surface, I favored that bearded middle-aged man. If I didn't happily accept the bet, wouldn't I directly reveal my true strength? Thus, I became even more hesitant. Don't misunderstand. It wasn't because I was worried about losing money. The reason why I won every time I gambled definitely wasn't because I had good gambling luck. On the contrary, my luck had never been good. The only reason why I could win every time was because I cheated every time. Although I could still cheat now, Letting that idiotic Holy Knight win and letting someone else's church win would probably be even more unpleasant than losing money. Originally, I could have taunted those fellows from the Church of the God of Justice and Commandment so that they would place more bets to make up for my losses. But when I considered the fact that this God's concept was discipline and that gambling was completely forbidden, I had a slight headache. Then let's postpone the duel and activate the backup plan. Harlois, let's move the plan forward. Can't you do something more serious? Didn't you say that the backup plan would be activated tomorrow? Isn't what we're doing serious right now? Who knows if there'll be new victims tomorrow? The safety of the innocent is the most important. It's our duty to eliminate evil cultists. Besides, with their investigative skills, how long do you think it'll take for them to find the truth? I'm so warm-hearted that even I'm moved by my actions. I can't be bothered to argue with you. Be careful that you don't screw up. While the two of us were still glaring at each other angrily, we didn't know that their duel was destined to end in failure. Soon, in the mountains behind the town, due to the carelessness of an outside adventurer, a sudden explosion would cause a small-scale landslide, and the secret of the mountains behind the town would be revealed, the burial ground of the demon dragon Windlair. That evil cultist from the Death Council had hidden himself quite well. In fact, I hadn't been able to find his hiding spot over the past few days. It was highly likely that he didn't even live in the nearby villages. Considering that they often had some undead characteristics, it was even possible that he had buried himself in a cemetery and waited for the adventurer to leave. No matter if it was their life signs or appearance, they would be no different from a corpse. If the adventurer was patient enough, it would be impossible to find him. But unlike those amateurs, experienced investigators wouldn't run around like headless flies, as that would only alert the enemy. They would only gather information and analyze the possible situation of the case. Among the many investigative methods, deducing the next target from the killer's characteristics was an old-fashioned method, but it was indeed quite practical. Since we already know that it's the Death Council, it's actually quite simple. The Death Council only has two goals in this world. The first is to open up a dimensional door to the undead planes and summon an undead calamity to spread death. The second is to create even more, even stronger undead creatures to expand their master's undead army. The first goal could be directly eliminated. Even in this day and age where the elemental tide was constantly rising, the conditions required to open a dimensional door weren't just a few. Even if the entire town was used as a blood sacrifice, it still wouldn't be enough. Furthermore, this place wasn't a dimensional link with an unstable spatial structure, so it was impossible to open up a dimensional door to the undead planes. In that case, there was basically only the second possibility. And creating a powerful undead creature required a sufficiently powerful corpse to be used as a material. And this wasn't something that couldn't be found. The rest was simple. I opened up the town mayor's archives and flipped through all the historical documents, legends, and so on. I eliminated all the meaningless distractions and came up with the only possible answer. We only found a story of the Dragon Slayer from over 300 years ago from Heroes Hymn. The story was so old that there was nothing new about it. The general idea was that a few adventurers were commissioned by a certain lord and successfully killed the evil dragon that stole the lord's precious daughter. In the end, the adventurers chose to live in this area, and one of the spear-wielding heroes was the source of this town's name, Anton. The other two heroes also left their legacies in two other towns. After finding out the story of the Dragonslayer, Harlois, who was known as the Mobile Library, looked up the local history books and compared them to the names of the characters. She was able to find out which unlucky dragon had been killed here. Magic Dragon Windlair, that's the name of an elf. It said that he once lived with the elves for a period of time. Yep, as the elves' mortal enemy, the Green Dragon, he had a good relationship with the elves. He even had 2 elven wives. What's even more strange is that even though he's a wind-poison dragon, he's an expert in fire magic. He even invented several unique fire magic spells. Countless facts prove that the truth of the legends was definitely a lie. Most of the epic heroes praised by the world were unreliable, but I still couldn't understand the difference between the actual records and the legends. An ancient dragon with 3 elements? He even invented specialized magic spells, which means he was at least a top-level archmage. Even a semi-god couldn't deal with such an opponent. Yet 3 heroes who haven't even appeared in the history books of our country did. According to the records, there might not even be an epic rank 1. We definitely didn't look down on this magic dragon, just because of the records. First of all, he had been with the elf for 700 or 800 years, so he was definitely an ancient dragon. Secondly, apart from his natural wind and poison magic, he also practiced fire magic, which was his specialty in war and slaughter. He was definitely a frightening war machine. For now, let's not look into what happened in this small town. Since we knew that this powerful magic dragon had died here, the Death Council's goal was obvious. And so, as an extremely qualified undead mage, I had countless methods to find the remains of powerful creatures. In just an hour, I found the dragon bones buried in the mountains behind the small town. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the violent explosion caused the ground to tremble, and the entire wooden structure of the bar was put to a great test. Very quickly, the dragon bones that had been blasted out from the explosion had attracted the attention of the Death Council's followers. Naturally, these fellows were unable to continue fighting. Originally, I had planned on waiting for another day to gather more information. But since there was such an unexpected event, I might as well do it earlier. Yep, I was just being hot-blooded, not because I couldn't bear to part with my gambling money. However, the entire ground was still shaking, and the wine glasses on the table were smashed to pieces. It seemed that I had gone overboard in some areas. The power of the explosion was too ridiculous. Heloise, how many explosives did you bury? That's a bit too much. I have 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad. Just tell me directly. After all, life is full of pitfalls. The good news is that our plan succeeded. I've already discovered the Death Council's followers. They sent people to keep an eye on this area, and they're currently hurriedly looking for companions to help. The bad news is that you weren't able to catch him? No, the bad news is that the Death Council went overboard. This dragon bone can't summon a bone dragon at all. Their plan was doomed to fail from the start. Isn't that good news? Of course it's bad news. The reason why it can't be summoned as a bone dragon is because it's not a dragon bone at all. What's buried under the mountain is a dragon lich that's gone mad from anger. And we just blew up his home. Chapter 486. Dragon Lich? Stop joking. Dragon liches aren't well-liked among dragons. There aren't many of them at all. How could we possibly encounter such a rare antique? I'm not joking. This dragon lich seems to be furious. Hurry up and save him, at least before he kills all the lives around him. When a violent explosion blew up more than half of the back mountain, this sudden duel naturally came to an end. Along with the flying sand and pebbles of the mountain, a black pillar of magic rose rapidly like a beacon. It was a terrifying magic that was a mixture of death magic and dragon's might. Finally, it transformed into a pitch-black dragon of smoke in the sky. This was the symbol of an enraged dragon lich. Liches were not to be trifled with. They were a way for archmages to prolong their lives when they were at the end of the road. Although the weakest liches in name were at least legendary rank, and although transforming into undead creatures would weaken their physical bodies, the long years of experience had allowed them to accumulate mage knowledge far beyond that of ordinary archmages. Dracolics were even more difficult to deal with. Unlike the fragile body of a lich, there was an essential difference between dragon bones and human bones in terms of quality. The body of a Dracolic, which was formed by the combination of dragon bones and magic power, was even stronger than the high-level undead bone dragons. Dragons, who were born to be good at both magic and dance, had no reason not to continue to use magic power to strengthen their bodies after death. While making up for their flaws, the fact that they were willing to transform themselves into dragon liches instead of dragon tomb guardians, specter dragons, and other undead dragon species could only mean that they had already walked very far on the path of magic in order to preserve their spellcasting abilities as much as possible. If a lich was the benchmark of an archmage, then a dragon lich was the benchmark of an adult dragon and an archmage. It was rare and abnormally difficult to deal with. What terrifying evil! Holy light! That enemy is worth fighting. Blade of Justice, third squad of Holy Knight Squad. Everyone is here. Gather. Charge towards the location of evil. The high-level Holy Knight who could summon a mount was preparing his lance. The other Holy Knights also naturally entered battle mode. The bishop tried to stop them, but was directly pushed away. Please don't stop us. It is our duty to defeat evil at the last moment of the Great Search. Sometimes, the Holy Knight class was not only difficult for opponents to deal with, but also complicated for their own people. For example, the Holy Knight before them was obviously a mega-boss that they couldn't deal with. Most people would think that if they could defeat this boss, they would fight it. If they couldn't defeat this boss, they would be afraid. However, when facing an enemy that they couldn't defeat, the more evil and powerful the Holy Knight would be, the more excited they would be due to the Holy Knight's sense of honor. And if the Holy Knight had a town or people they wanted to protect, they would fight to the death without retreating. 7 years ago, after the battle between the Holy Light and the Guardians, Estrada's deeds spread throughout the entire world. The fact that the entire world was shrouded in darkness became more and more obvious, which made the Holy Knight even more excited whenever they encountered battles of sacrifice or protection. Although some people mocked the Holy Knight for being like berserkers who didn't know when to retreat, they had to admit that their bravery and sacrifice had indeed saved many innocent lives. This was also the main reason why the Holy Church's reputation kept worsening and why the Holy Knight was always so well-liked by everyone. Everyone would never forget those who truly treated them well. But right now, this fearless of powerful enemies trait of the Holy Church was giving their comrades quite a headache. With such frightening magic, they're unhesitatingly charging forward. Didn't the manual say that if you meet an enemy you can't defeat, the first thing to consider is self-preservation? That's not the main point. The main point is that they're so aggressive. They're probably going to attack the moment they see the enemy. Why aren't they communicating with each other first before yelling about killing and attacking? Could it be that anyone who uses dark or undead magic is definitely their mortal enemy? However, the Northland trio was quite calm. At the very least, the training they received didn't allow them to treat all undead and dark mages as natural mortal enemies. Apart from the humanized Northland factions, most organizations and countries wouldn't include self-preservation and calm communication in their training manuals. To them, cannon fodder and tools wouldn't be as useful if they learn how to think. But at this moment, the two investigation teams were on the same boat. If the Holy Knight really angered that powerful existence, the entire town would probably suffer calamity. After some simple communication, the Northland trio followed suit. However, they first returned to their rooms to grab some backup tools. Before that, all of the mercenaries stationed at the Rhino Tavern also took out their weapons. At the very least, they were able to observe the situation at the scene, which was better than waiting here. Just as I was putting away all of the gambling scrolls and wagers, I was about to take a look as well, hoping that I would be able to collect the silly cat's corpse in time. However, before I could leave the room, I was pulled back by a hand from behind. What are you going to do? It's not like you can help, so don't cause trouble for everyone. Although her tone was unyielding, there was some worry on her delicate face. Catalina held a broom as a strange dark yellow light flashed in her eyes. I paused for a moment, but the next moment I smiled and made a decision. It's about time. Then come with me. You can look after me, so you can be at ease, right? I reached out and grabbed the little girl's hand. The little girl struggled to break free, and her face instantly reddened. However, I didn't have the time to explain. Old Barton, let's go out for a while. I hurriedly ran out of the tavern. Before I left, I even waved at the tavern owner. I jumped onto the horse beside the tavern, pulled the little girl up, and prepared to ride together with her. However, before I could take more than a few steps, the furious roar transformed into a solid dragon's roar. It's you bunch of tin cans again. I was hiding underground, yet you were still able to find me. Fine, if you don't give me an explanation today and don't compensate me for my treasures, I'll wait for your god to come and take me away. The resentment in the dragon's voice rose to the heavens, and dark clouds suddenly gathered. The berserk anger could transform into a solid black whirlwind. Being able to transform one's will into something that could interfere with the world was also a sign of power. I once again revised my evaluation of this dragon lich. It was likely that he was at least a top-level mage with a soul world. In that case, those dozen holy knights were basically given away for nothing. As for these holy knights, it seemed that they had taken the blame for someone, and many of them might have already died. Even I felt slightly guilty at this moment, but after thinking about it, I got over it. At any rate, they're here to investigate this matter. In the end, the Death Council will definitely involve the Dragon Lich. Compared to using the normal method of talking to the villagers, accepting small quests to increase reputation, and investigating one clue at a time, directly fighting the boss will greatly save time and resources. Fighting the final boss without leveling up and obtaining a holy sword? Are you sure you're helping them carry smurfs and not sending them to hell? Cough. Aren't I going over to help? The Rhino Tavern wasn't too far from the mountain behind the town to begin with. Riding horses, we even surpassed the adventurers on foot, but when we arrived, we saw a frightening scene. A gigantic white-boned dragon was roaring angrily, and in front of him was a golden-haired human girl. The knight Captain White, who had attempted to save the knight, was trampled under the dragon's feet, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The Holy Knights' heads were all buried in the ground, and the third team of the Sword of Justice Knight Squadron had already been completely annihilated. Her slender golden hair was as smooth as silk, and her small face was as cute and alluring as a red apple. At such a young age, she already had the ability to attract people to commit crimes. Let go of that lowly, let me do it. The moment I shouted this, the scene instantly froze. The Dragon Lich looked at me in astonishment, and then I realized that something was wrong. I think I misspoke, cough. Let go of that girl, come at me if you dare. The Dragon Lich suddenly raised his head, and his vision swept back and forth between me and the golden-haired girl. Then he raised his head and let out a shocking roar, and a black dragon's breath tore through the sky, the aura of death materializing. The next moment, the dragon's eyes, formed from green soul fire, appeared in front of me. Soul connection? Finally, someone recognized you. You're this brat's guardian. Not only did your brat play with firecrackers and blow up my house door, but all my treasures that I've accumulated for thousands of years are all gone. All gone. What do you think we should do? These are all precious replicas from the Elven Empire's era. Although they aren't the real deal, they're still the masterpieces of an elf master. Can you even afford to pay for them? The dragon's fingerbone pointed at the ruins in front of me, where a pile of what used to be elven sculptures was abnormally eye-catching. It would seem that those precious artworks of the past had all been destroyed by the explosion. The next moment, the Dragon Lich started rolling around on the ground and crying bitterly upon seeing the pile of rubble. My treasures, my one-to-one replicas of the elven beauties. In the name of Aichi, how can this world be so cruel? I paused in surprise for a moment as I looked at the Dragon Lich, who seemed to be wailing and asking for compensation. For some reason, I recalled the tragedy of a brat in a certain world's otaku treasure trove, as well as the pitiful scene of those expensive figurines being torn apart. TSK, another Lich otaku. As expected, Lich that have been otaku for too long are all perverts. Looking at the current elf, who had a face full of disgust as she said hurtful words through our soul connection, but on the surface, she still pretended to be innocent. For some reason, I recalled the tragedy of Annie's surprise attack in Sulphur Mountain City, when my rare magazines and one-of-a-kind books ended up becoming that naughty brat's scribbles. Annie also looked at me with a face full of innocence. I pitied this unlucky dragon, Lich, even more. I suddenly recalled that in the information I'd read, this strange dragon had lived together with the elves for a very long time. Perhaps it wasn't because she coveted magic or secrets, but purely because she wanted to collect materials for her creations. Looking at Harlois, who was pretending to be innocent just like in back then, I recalled how I could only patiently reason with the brat after being robbed countless times by the brat without being able to lose my temper. I felt rather displeased. and the best way to vent my displeasure was to make others even more displeased. Stop crying. You're a dragon lich. Don't even mention the Elven Empire's ancient trash and crude replicas. I have the Elven Empire's Elven Princess here. Her inventory is definitely more abundant than yours. Right? You shouldn't be 2,000 years old yet, right? Then you definitely haven't seen the gold elves of the Elven Empire before. They're said to be the most beautiful and perfect elves. If you use them as a model, perhaps you'll be able to create a masterpiece. The dragon Lich stopped, but his soul fire began to burn fiercely. Really? Gold elves? Impossible. No, truth-seeing didn't react. You're telling the truth. There really are gold elves in this world. This dragon Lich had locked himself away more than 300 years ago. At that time, Harloise was still the Banshee Queen. It wasn't wrong at all to say that the gold elves were extinct. Right now, he was twisting his body in delight as black mist transformed into a pair of wings. His entire body seemed to be dancing a strange dance. Wait a moment, you actually dared to sell me out? Dragon Lich. He was the one who told me to set up a magic array to blow up the mountain. Hurry up and eat him. TSK, a gold elven magical pet for rent. As long as you have enough rent, everything is negotiable. Chapter 487. According to the normal plot of a fantasy novel, this was how things should have developed. On the path of tracking down the evil cultists, the adventuring team that the main character was in a subtle relationship of competition and cooperation with opposing adventurers. They gradually collected clues and investigated the dark shadow hidden in the small town. Finally, with the help of the villagers, they discovered the mastermind behind the scenes. However, they didn't expect that the mastermind had already successfully released the sealed Dragon Lich. The Dragon Lich was undefeatable. The two opposing adventuring teams could only helplessly band together to resist. However, the enemy was far too powerful, and they were still no match for him. At this critical moment of despair, a certain person stood up. Then, there's the delightful method of using cheats to fight the boss. The most common methods of using cheats include the main character's aura exploding, summoning elite reinforcements, and so on. A more logical method would be for a priest to burn her life force and perform a god's descent. It'd be even more effective if it was a beautiful female priest. Perhaps the audience might even shed some tears, right? If the female lead's popularity isn't high enough, she could sacrifice herself. Not only would she satisfy the audience's needs, but the second female lead would also take advantage of the situation and give the main character an excuse to explode in popularity. Although it's old-fashioned, it's indeed practical. Many of those legendary stories use this method. Although I've seen many of them, I still felt my blood boil. Especially when a female lead died, I really sympathized with her. I didn't expect there to be such a reason behind it. Truly, listening to a single conversation is better than reading 10 years of books. You're definitely an outstanding scholar. The Dragon Lich Windlair kept nodding. He didn't even consider that if things really developed in a dramatic fashion, the main character would mysteriously kill off the boss and the story would be him. Of course, we were just spouting nonsense in our hearts. Stories were stories, and reality was reality. In this world, there was no such thing as the weak defeating the strong for no reason. Winning just because you put your life on the line was just a joke. A true victor would definitely have an advantage, even if it was just luck. You feel that he's improving like he's using cheats, that he's progressing step by step into glory. Perhaps you just haven't seen his advantages and his private hardships. People were used to ignoring the accumulation and repeated failures of successful people before they reach the peak. Those lucky ones who managed to succeed, once due to a stroke of great luck, if they thought that they were the lucky ones and kept challenging those who were stronger than them, they wouldn't live long. In a sense, White and the others were quite lucky. At the very least, if it had been a normal Dracolic, its corpse would have turned cold by now. Perhaps today would teach them a lesson. Is it okay to leave those guys on the ground? It's fine, it's fine. I didn't expect the legendary level Holy Knight to be so weak. They all fainted from an excessive amount of negative energy. They probably didn't even see my face. But little girl, are you really a gold elf? Why does negative energy blast seem to have a buff effect on you? You are also an undead, but I can clearly feel that you are a living creature. Harloise didn't reply. It seemed that she was still unhappy that I had sold her out, but when faced with Windlair's question, I spoke first. Hee hee, that's a long story. It's a result of my personal research, and it involves semi-undead creatures. I trust that you, as a Dracolic, understand the rules. A mage's research results were his most important wealth. Forcefully stealing them would be the equivalent of starting a full-scale war. If he wanted to obtain information, he would at least need to give me an equivalent research result. Windlair nodded slightly and didn't ask any more questions. Even though he was famous for being easy to talk to among the extraordinary individuals, if both sides weren't on the same level, it would be impossible to talk to him on equal terms. Immemorial dragons were born with the ability to see through lies and illusions. Undead liches had abnormal soul vision. Windlair could tell that something was off from both sides. At the very least, he was unable to see through the little girl and the adult male in front of him. And the fact that even he couldn't see through them meant that they were definitely abnormally dangerous existences. The Holy Knight's personal warhorses were the fastest to escape. However, they were all instantly wiped out. After us, the other adventurers and the Northland's three-man team didn't travel very quickly. By the time they arrived, only the Holy Knight remained. However, these Holy Knights had died instantly. It was likely that they wouldn't even know what had happened. As for us, who had already left, I never expected that you would agree to enter my residence. After all, this is a dragon's nest. The hole in a mountain range had already been sealed up. Windlair walked in front with an oil lamp in hand, while the invited guests followed closely behind him. I apologize, I forgot that you don't have night vision. He suddenly snapped his fingers, causing all the magical oil lamps to light up. We were now in a hallway filled with murals, and we had reached the end of this hallway. Asterisk crack. Asterisk, all the lampposts on the walls were lit up. We were in a gigantic hall with extravagant decorations and beautiful decorations. The only thing lacking was that many gargoyles were currently repairing the ceiling. It would seem that this was the place where the disaster had occurred. As for the collections around us, they were either this dragon lich's personal collection room or his bedroom. The sculptures, murals, paintings, and decorations were all filled with elven style. It would seem that this dragon lich was truly a pure elven fanatic. But the most ridiculous part was, oh my, Windlair, are you Korean or Taikoff? Do you look like a female elf? Judging from your voice, you should be a male dragon, right? I was a male dragon when I was alive. As for after death, gender was meaningless to begin with. The pursuit of beauty was my only goal in life. I spent my entire life focusing on the beauty of elves, so it was only natural that I chose the most beautiful elf template as my human form. Windlair was about the same height as an ordinary elf, but he had sexy curves comparable to a succubus. His slender blonde hair was curled in a regal fashion. He was also one of the most outstanding elves in terms of pure beauty and domineering figure. His smile was so alluring. If it wasn't for the fact that his powerful soul voice couldn't be faked, I really would have thought that he was a miniature version of the Gold Elf Queen. My mom. He looks so much like my mom. His smiling expression is exactly the same as her mother from back in the day. Windlair's somewhat familiar face caused Harloise to recall her past memories. But right after that, she was openly displeased. But right now, the enemy was stronger than her, so it wasn't convenient for her to make trouble for him. I'm tired. Harloise didn't even look at the elven artwork that she had been so interested in earlier. She transformed into her cat form and jumped on my shoulder, closing her eyes and yawning. However, this scene startled Katerina, who had been trembling and tugging on my clothes the entire time as she followed me. Catalina had once fed the silly cat food before, but the silly cat was completely uninterested in the leftovers from the bar. Now that so many inconceivable things were happening one after another, Catalina felt like it was too much for her to take in. Her Highness Harloise? I've heard of her beautiful name in the past as well. She's the most brilliant gold moon in the Gold Elf Empire. This incarnation of mine was based on a portrait of her from back in the day. Back in the day, my incarnation was only an adult version of my fake incarnation. All right then, the original incarnation wasn't based on Harloise' mother, but rather Harloise herself. The silly cat's expression became rather complex when she heard this. Unfortunately, there's an obvious mistake. Gold elves are taller than superior elves, and superior elves are generally taller than ordinary elves. Your incarnation needs to be at least 1/3 larger. That's the size that a gold elf should have. Before I even finished speaking, Winlair, whose gender was unknown, took out his notebook and started recording. He then looked at me with a fervent gaze, as if he was waiting for me to continue. After a long while, Winlair finally calmed down, seeming to feel somewhat embarrassed as he coughed lightly. Cough, what a pity. It's truly regrettable that I wasn't able to live 10,000 years ago. If I had the honor of seeing Her Highness Harlowe's true appearance, I would be willing to exchange my entire lifetime's worth of treasures for it. However, Winlair's gaze then turned towards the only mortal here. I wonder what this lady's relationship with you all is? The aura of death here is far too heavy. It's not suitable for ordinary people. I apologize for my lack of manners. Winlair suddenly stopped mid-sentence. How many years had it been since this place had been properly ventilated? The aura of death here was so thick that it could directly suffocate a living person to death. The fact that Catalina had followed me all the way until now meant that she was definitely no ordinary person. Dragon descendant? Demon descendant? Divine descendant? However, I denied all of Winlair's guesses. Actually, Catalina had hidden herself quite well. If it wasn't for the fact that I had read the walkthrough, I really wouldn't have been able to guess the truth. She's indeed not a pure human, but that's not important. I paused for a moment and looked towards Catalina. However, I discovered that although her face was filled with fear, she didn't have any expression of shock or disbelief. It was as if she had long since known that she wasn't human, but was afraid that others would know the truth. Caro, you got it. I lowered my head and smiled at her terrified expression. Then I rubbed her hair twice. I told you before that I'm a myth-ranked hero. Why do some people refuse to believe me? Relax, I'm on your side. The next instant I spoke to Winlair. Actually, it doesn't matter who she is. What's important is her father, Old Barton. He's quite the character. That's right, I had stayed in this bar for half a year not because of Catalina, but because of Catalina's adopted father, Old Barton. Old Barton was a super fierce general who should have returned to the legend-ranked battlefield 10 years later. Old Barton was the myth-ranked strongest dragon knight general. If it wasn't for the fact that he advanced too late and died early from old age, he would have been one of the top 10 strongest individuals in this holy war. After more than half a year of training, Old Barton's true power level had far surpassed that of his peers in history. His ores were becoming more and more similar to gemstones. I had high hopes for that ugly bald man's future. I also went to find Winlair to ask some questions, some answers that only he could give me. I originally found it strange that Old Barton, a local mercenary who had nothing better to do, was recognized by the proud dragons and became a dragon knight general. Just where did he get his dragon bloodline? And it just so happened that he was a descendant of the rarest cyan dragons. But now it's clear. Barton Anton, the last descendant of the hero of the spear, is also your descendant? Winlair paused for a moment at my question, but then his face was filled with delight. She really gave birth to my child? She really does love me. My overactive imagination allowed me to instantly understand everything. At this moment, my worldview received a heavy blow. Barton was the descendant of the three heroes, so the she that this perverted dragon was talking about was naturally one of the three heroes. In that case, the so-called legend of the three heroes slaying the evil dragon was definitely far from reality. It's no longer strange for a demon king and a hero to fall in love with each other. It's also understandable that a dragon slayer warrior would give birth to a descendant of a dragon. Yep, it's completely understandable. It's nothing. I don't understand. My ancestor was a hero who defeated the evil dragon, not some. But before she could finish her sentence, Winlair hugged her. His dragon's strength instantly swung the girl up like a swing, but the next moment, she returned to his soft, rippling embrace. If your father is my descendant, then you're my descendant as well? How pitiful, you're so thin and weak. It must have been hard on you for so many years without any elders to take care of you. You can call me Grandpa, and I'll take good care of you in the future. But the next moment, he noticed that something was wrong with the girl in his arms. You're not a dragon descendant? You're not even a living creature? A metal skeleton? What kind of life form is this? I hesitated for a moment and looked at Catalina, who had a face full of fear. I knew that it was time to face reality. Winlair, have you heard of the Haletum generation and their taboo research that touched upon the divine realm?